Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're journeying back nearly 2,000 years to a time of emperors, legions, and epic ambition. But our story doesn't begin in the marble halls of Rome. Instead, we find ourselves in the quiet rolling hills of the Italian countryside. In a place called Reate, known today as Reate. The year is 09 AD while the mighty Roman Empire is still reeling. From the devastating loss of 3 entire legions in the Teutoburg forest, a momentous event occurs here, far from the capital's drama. A child is born, one who will one day hold the fate of Rome in his hands. His name is Titus Flavius Vespasianus. We know him simply as Vespasian. Now, when you think of Roman emperors, you probably picture figures born into immense wealth and power. Names like Augustus or Nero, men who were destined for greatness from the cradle. Vespasian's story is completely different. He wasn't born with a silver spoon, let alone a golden one. His family, the Flavians, were what we'd call middle class. They belonged to the equestrian order, a respectable social rank, but a world away from the senatorial elite who had governed Rome for centuries. His grandfather had been a debt collector, and his father was a tax collector and moneylender, professions that were necessary but certainly not glamorous. They were practical, hard-working people, not patrician aristocrats dreaming of imperial glory. This humble beginning is the key to understanding the man Vespasian would become. He wasn't a product of the palace, he was a son of the Italian soil. Imagine the contrast. In Rome, the heart of the empire, life was a whirlwind of political intrigue, lavish spectacles at the Colosseum's predecessor, and the constant struggle for power. The city was a noisy, crowded, and often dangerous place where fortunes were made and lost in an instant. Back in Reate, life moved at a different pace. It was a world of olive groves, vineyards, and pastoral simplicity. This was the environment that shaped young Vespasian. He grew up not with the entitlement of a prince, but with the pragmatism of the countryside. He would have learned the value of hard work, thrift, and common sense qualities often in short supply among the Roman elite. This upbringing gave him a connection to the common people of Italy, an understanding of their lives and concerns that would prove invaluable later on. While the children of senators were learning Greek philosophy and rhetoric, Vespasian was likely learning more practical lessons about land, money, and human nature. To really grasp Vespasian's world, let's paint a picture of Rome in the early 1st century AD. The legendary Augustus, the first Roman emperor, is in the final years of his long and transformative reign. He had brought peace and stability after decades of civil war, establishing a system of government that would endure for centuries. But this stability was fragile. The empire was vast, stretching from Britain to Syria, and managing it was a monumental task. The memory of the Republic was still alive, and the tension between the power of the emperor and the traditions of the Senate was a constant undercurrent in Roman politics. It was a world of incredible opportunity, but also of great peril. For a young man from a modest family like Vespasian, the path to the top was anything but guaranteed. He would have to rely not on his family name, but on his own talent, ambition, and a good deal of luck. His journey from the quiet fields of Reate to the throne of the Roman Empire is one of history's most remarkable underdog stories, a testament to the idea that true greatness can emerge from the most unexpected of places. This quiet birth in the shadows of Rome was the unassuming first step of a man who would not only become emperor, but would save the empire from collapse and found a dynasty. So, how did this country boy begin his climb up the treacherous Roman ladder? His early life was marked by a distinct lack of grand ambition. Unlike his older brother, Sabinus, who eagerly pursued a public career, Vespasian was initially hesitant. According to the historian Suetonius, it was his mother, Vespasia Paula, who pushed him forward. She was a formidable woman from a more distinguished family, and she saw the potential in her son that he might not have seen in himself. She reportedly taunted him, calling him his brother's orderly, until he finally relented and decided to seek his fortune in Rome. This maternal push was the catalyst that set his career in motion. His first steps were modest, serving in the military in Thrace, in modern-day Bulgaria, and holding a junior administrative post in Crete and Cyrene. These weren't glamorous assignments. They were the standard, grinded-out jobs for any young equestrian hoping to make a name for himself. He was learning the ropes, gaining experience in governing the provinces and commanding soldiers. It was during this period that Vespasian began to develop his reputation. He wasn't known for being brilliant or flashy, but for being diligent, competent, and incredibly down-to-earth. He had a gruff sense of humor and a no-nonsense attitude that set him apart from the more polished aristocrats. He was also notoriously careful with money, a trait likely inherited from his father and grandfather. While some saw this as stinginess, others saw it as a refreshing antidote to the extravagance and corruption that were so common among Roman officials. He was a man you could rely on to get the job done without bankrupting the treasury. He also made a crucial personal decision: his marriage to Flavia Domitilla. Like him, she was not from a high-ranking family. This marriage was one of affection and partnership, not political ambition. Together, they had 3 children: Titus, Domitian, and a daughter, also named Domitilla. This stable family life provided a foundation of support and normalcy that would anchor him through the turbulent years ahead. He was building his career brick by brick, not through grand schemes or powerful connections, but through steady, reliable work. The turning point for Vespasian came with the accession of the Emperor Claudius in 41 AD. Claudius's reign was a time of opportunity for capable men, as the emperor relied heavily on skilled administrators and generals, often promoting them based on merit rather than noble birth. Vespasian found a powerful patron in Narcissus, one of Claudius's most influential freedmen. Thanks to this connection, Vespasian was given command of the Legio II, Augusta, during the Roman invasion of Britain in 43 AD. This was his big break. For 4 years, Vespasian campaigned in the south of England, proving himself to be a brilliant and fearless commander. Suetonius tells us he fought 30 battles, subdued 2 powerful tribes, and captured more than 20 towns, including the Isle of Wight. He wasn't directing the war from a safe distance. He was on the front lines, leading his men, and even getting wounded in the process. His success in Britain was undeniable. He had transformed from a competent administrator into a celebrated war hero. His military triumphs earned him great accolades back in Rome. He was awarded triumphal ornaments and was elected to the prestigious office of consul for the last 2 months of 51 AD. This was a massive achievement for a man of his background. He had officially broken into the upper echelons of Roman society. However, his rise was not without its challenges. After his patron Narcissus fell from power, Vespasian's career stalled. For several years, he lived in quiet retirement, avoiding the dangerous political climate of Nero's court. He knew when to keep his head down, but his reputation for competence and honesty was remembered. Around 63 AD, he was appointed proconsul, or governor, of Africa. Here, his famous frugality got him into trouble. The locals found his administration so strict and penny-pinching that they reportedly pelted him with turnips in the street. Yet, he governed honorably and left the province without enriching himself, a rarity in those days. This period of his life shows us the complete picture of the man: a superb general, a capable but unpopular governor, and a savvy political survivor. He was biding his time, waiting for the right moment, unaware that the greatest challenge and greatest opportunity of his life was just around the corner: a massive revolt in the province of Judea that would set him on the path to the imperial throne itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's fascinating to see how the quiet beginnings of a man like Vespasian could lead to such incredible heights. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more stories from history. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the life of Vespasian. Last time, we set the stage for the dramatic year of the 4 emperors. But to truly understand the man who would bring stability back to Rome, we need to rewind. We need to go back to his roots, to a family that was anything but imperial. This is the story of the Flavians, a family whose rise from obscurity to the pinnacle of power is one of the most remarkable tales in Roman history. Forget the ancient noble bloodlines of the Julio-Claudians. The Flavians were new money provincials, the kind of family the old Roman aristocracy would have looked down their noses at. Their story doesn't begin in the marble halls of the Palatine Hill, but in the dusty countryside of Reate, modern-day Reate, a Sabine town nestled in the mountains northeast of Rome. This was the heartland of tough, no-nonsense farmers and soldiers, and Vespasian was a product of this environment through and through. His grandfather, Titus Flavius Petro, was the first in the family to really start the climb. He wasn't a senator or a general. He was a centurion, a backbone officer of the Roman legions. He fought for the great Pompey during the civil war against Julius Caesar. And when Caesar won, Petro found himself on the losing side. He was discharged, but he didn't receive the usual land grants given to veterans. He had to start over. He returned to Reate and became a debt collector, a profession that wasn't exactly popular but was certainly profitable. He was a practical man, a survivor, and he passed that resilience down. This brings us to Vespasian's father, Titus Flavius Sabinus. Sabinus didn't follow his father into the military. Instead, he carved out a niche in the world of finance, another path to wealth for those outside the traditional aristocracy. He became a tax collector, specifically a customs official in the province of Asia, modern-day Western Turkey. Now, tax collectors, or publicani had a terrible reputation. They were notorious for their greed and corruption, often squeezing provincials for every last denarius. But Sabinus was different. He was known for his honesty, so much so that the cities in his district erected statues in his honor, inscribed with the words, "To an honest taxman." Can you imagine? It was a rare tribute, a testament to his character. After his stint in Asia, he became a moneylender in what is now Switzerland, and he did very well for himself, dying a wealthy man. He provided the financial foundation that his sons would build upon. But if Vespasian's father provided the money, his mother, Vespasia Paula, provided the ambition. She came from a slightly more distinguished family from Nursia. Her father had reached the rank of military tribune, and her brother became a senator. For a woman of her standing, she had high hopes for her sons, Sabinus the younger and our man Vespasian. She saw the potential for them to break into the highest echelons of Roman society, to reach the Senate itself. His older brother, also named Sabinus, was the more naturally ambitious of the two. He eagerly pursued the cursus honorum the traditional sequence of political offices for aspiring Roman senators. But Vespasian? He was different. Initially, he showed little interest in a public career. He was content with a quieter life, perhaps imagining himself as a country gentleman on his family's estates. According to the historian Suetonius, it was his mother's constant nagging and sharp-tongued mockery that finally pushed him onto the political ladder. She didn't praise him. She belittled him, calling him her donkey driver, who was content to walk in his brother's shadow. It was a harsh form of motivation, but it worked. This maternal pressure, this blend of ambition and insult, lit a fire under the reluctant young man. Now, let's take a moment to understand just how steep this climb was. Social mobility in ancient Rome was possible, but it was incredibly difficult. The Senate was a club dominated by a handful of ancient families who had held power for generations. They were the nobiles the known men. A man like Vespasian was what they called novus homo a new man, the first in his family to enter the Senate. It was a term that was part observation, part insult. These new men were often seen as upstarts, outsiders who didn't quite belong. The famous orator Cicero was a new man, and he never stopped hearing about it. For a family of tax collectors and mid-level soldiers from the Italian countryside, to produce not just a senator, but an emperor? It was almost unthinkable. It would be like a small-town accountant's grandson becoming president today. The odds were stacked impossibly high against them. This humble background was the crucible that forged Vespasian's character. He wasn't raised with a silver spoon in his mouth. He learned the value of money from his father, the honest taxman. He learned discipline and grit from the military legacy of his grandfather. And from his mother, he learned that he had to be better, to strive harder than those born with every advantage. These weren't abstract lessons. They were the daily reality of his upbringing. Unlike the decadent young nobles of Rome, who might spend their youth in luxury and vice, Vespasian was grounded. He understood the lives of ordinary soldiers and common people because, just a generation or two before, that's who his family was. This connection to the common man, this lack of pretense, would become one of his greatest strengths. While other emperors saw the people as a mob to be placated with bread and circuses, Vespasian saw them as the foundation of the state. He spoke their language, not just literally, but figuratively. He had a rustic wit and a down-to-earth manner that stood in stark contrast to the divine pretensions of emperors like Nero. So, when we look at the man who would eventually take the throne, we see the echoes of his family's journey. We see the centurion's toughness, the taxman's pragmatism, and the mother's relentless ambition. This wasn't a man destined for greatness by birthright. He was a man who, pushed by his family and forged by his modest origins, would have to earn every single step up the ladder. And that ladder was about to get very bloody and very chaotic. The reluctant country boy was on his way to Rome, and the world would never be the same. Thanks so much for watching. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Roman history, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, where we'll follow Vespasian as he begins his own military and political career. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the life of Vespasian. In our last chapter, we saw a young man from a humble background, destined for something greater. Now we follow him as he takes his first steps onto the world stage, not as a politician but as a soldier. This is Chapter 3, The Soldier's Path. The Roman Empire under Emperor Tiberius was a sprawling, complex machine, and its lifeblood was the legions. For a young man like Titus Flavius Vespasian, the military wasn't just a career choice. It was a rite of passage, a crucible where character was forged and fortunes were made or broken. Stepping into this world, Vespasian left behind the relative comfort of his equestrian upbringing for the harsh realities of legionary life. Imagine the scene. Thousands of men, clad in iron and leather, moving as one. The air hums with the rhythmic tramp of hobnailed sandals on dusty roads, the clank of armor and the sharp commands of a centurion. This was Vespasian's new home. Life in a Roman legion was a masterclass in discipline. Days began before dawn, not with a gentle awakening, but with the blare of a horn. The hours that followed were a relentless cycle of drills. There was the armatura, the practice of weapon handling, where soldiers sparred with weighted wooden swords and shields heavier than their battle gear. They practiced formations, learning to create the impenetrable tortoise or the devastating wedge, moving with a unity that made the legions the most feared fighting force in the world. Discipline was absolute and unforgiving. The slightest infraction could result in harsh punishment, yet this severity fostered an unbreakable bond among the men. They were more than a unit. They were a brotherhood sharing meals of coarse bread and sour wine, sleeping side by side under leather tents, and entrusting their lives to one another in the chaos of battle. Vespasian, ever the pragmatist, thrived in this environment. He didn't seek the spotlight, he sought competence. He learned the logistics of supply, the engineering of building fortified camps overnight, and most importantly, he learned the mind of the common soldier. He ate what they ate, marched as they marched, and dug ditches alongside them. This was not a man who commanded from a gilded chariot far behind the lines. Vespasian's initial posting was as a military tribune in Thrace, a wild and often rebellious province on the empire's frontier. It was here that he first tasted command, responsible for a cohort of roughly 500 men. This wasn't a glamorous assignment in Rome or a cushy post in a peaceful province. This was the sharp end of the spear. He would have been responsible for everything, from settling disputes among his men to leading patrols against local tribesmen. It was a baptism by fire, and it taught him invaluable lessons in leadership, diplomacy, and the grim realities of warfare. He learned that a commander's authority came not just from his rank, but from the respect he earned from his men. His solid, dependable performance did not go unnoticed. From tribune, he steadily climbed the ladder of command, the cursus honorum of the military man. He was promoted to legate, placing him in command of an entire legion, a force of nearly 6,000 men. This was a position of immense responsibility. As a legatus, Vespasian wasn't just a battlefield commander. He was a governor, an administrator, and a judge for the vast number of soldiers and civilians under his authority. He was now a significant player in the imperial system, a man entrusted with the security of an entire region. One of his most significant commands was during the Claudian invasion of Britain in 43 AD. This was a major imperial undertaking, a campaign to conquer the mysterious island that had defied even the great Julius Caesar. Vespasian commanded the Legio II Augusta. While other generals might have sought glorious, high-risk battles, Vespasian's approach was methodical and relentless. He was a master of siege warfare, a gritty, unglamorous form of combat that required patience, engineering skill, and a deep understanding of logistics. The Roman historian Suetonius tells us that during the British campaign, Vespasian fought 30 battles, subjugated 2 powerful tribes, and captured more than 20 hillforts, or oppida*, including the Isle of Wight. This wasn't the work of a flashy, heroic general of legend. This was the work of a grinder. He wouldn't risk his men in a reckless charge if a well-constructed siege ramp and a coordinated assault could achieve the same objective with fewer casualties. His soldiers respected him for it. They knew their commander was tough and demanding, but they also knew he wouldn't waste their lives for personal glory. His reputation grew, not as a dashing figure like Alexander the Great, but as a steady, reliable hand. In an empire often swayed by charismatic but erratic leaders, Vespasian was different. He was old-fashioned, valuing hard work and results over eloquent speeches and grand gestures. He had a gruff, down-to-earth manner and a dry sense of humor that endeared him to his troops. They saw him not as a distant aristocrat, but as one of their own, a professional soldier who understood their world. This perception was his greatest asset. While other commanders postured, Vespasian simply got the job done. His approach was defined by practicality. If a bridge needed to be built, he ensured it was built quickly and to last. If a fortress needed to be taken, he systematically dismantled its defenses. This period of his life, from the muddy fields of Britain to the frontiers of Germania, shaped the man who would one day rule Rome. He learned that an army, and indeed an empire, runs not on glory, but on logistics, discipline, and the loyalty of its people. He saw firsthand the strengths and weaknesses of the imperial system from the ground up. He wasn't a product of the Senate's political intrigues or the court's whispered conspiracies. He was forged in the camp and on the battlefield. This reputation for steadiness and competence would follow him throughout his career, a quiet but powerful force that would eventually propel him to the highest office in the Roman world. The soldier's path had prepared him for an emperor's destiny. Thank you for joining me for this chapter. The story is just getting started, and the trials Vespasian faced as a soldier were only a prelude to the chaos that was to come. If you're enjoying this historical journey, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'll see you in Chapter 4. Hello and welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Vespasian. In today's chapter, the Roman Empire in turmoil, we're stepping into one of the most chaotic and unpredictable periods in Roman history. To truly understand the man Vespasian would become, we first have to understand the world that shaped him, a world of paranoia, excess, and sheer imperial madness under the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Imagine being an ambitious young senator, trying to build a career in a city where the rules changed with the emperor's mood. This was Vespasian's reality. He began his public life under Tiberius, the successor to the legendary Augustus. Tiberius started out okay, but his reign slowly descended into a grim, paranoid affair. He retreated from Rome, leaving the city in the hands of his ruthless Praetorian prefect, Sejanus. Treason trials became commonplace. A wrong word, a misinterpreted glance, could lead to your ruin. For a practical, no-nonsense man like Vespasian, this must have been his first major lesson in political survival. Keep your head down, do your job, and don't attract unnecessary attention. It was a strategy of quiet competence in an age of loud danger. But if Tiberius was a dark cloud, his successor, Caligula, was a full-blown hurricane. When Caligula took the throne in 37 AD, Rome breathed a collective sigh of relief. He was young, popular, and the son of the beloved general Germanicus. The first few months were a party, but then something snapped. Whether it was illness, the intoxicating effect of absolute power, or something else, we'll never know for sure. What we do know is that Caligula's reign devolved into a spectacle of absurdity and terror. He declared himself a living god, demanding worship. He spent the empire's treasury on lavish projects and personal extravagances. And who can forget the story of him planning to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul? While modern historians debate the literal truth of that, the fact that people believed it speaks volumes about how unhinged his rule had become. For Vespasian, navigating this court was like walking on a tightrope over a pit of vipers. He had to participate in the charade, offering the emperor the flattery he demanded, all while trying to remain invisible. One famous story tells of Caligula being furious with Vespasian, who was in charge of street cleaning, for not keeping Rome's streets clean enough. The emperor supposedly ordered soldiers to stuff mud down the front of Vespasian's toga. Humiliating? Absolutely. But Vespasian took it. He endured the embarrassment because he understood the alternative was far, far worse. He was learning that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride. Caligula's reign of terror ended abruptly with his assassination by his own guards in 41 AD. In the ensuing chaos, the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's bodyguards, stumbled upon a terrified man hiding behind a curtain. It was Caligula's uncle, Claudius. Thinking he'd be killed next, he was instead proclaimed the new emperor. No one expected much from Claudius. He had a limp, a stammer, and was seen by many as the family embarrassment. But he proved them all wrong. Claudius was surprisingly effective. He was a diligent administrator who stabilized the government and launched one of Rome's most significant military campaigns, the invasion of Britain in 43 AD. And this is where Vespasian's quiet competence finally paid off. Claudius needed capable, loyal commanders, not just flashy aristocrats. He saw in Vespasian a man who got things done. Vespasian was given command of a legion, the Legio II Augusta, and sent to Britain. Here, far from the toxic politics of the capital, Vespasian thrived. He was a soldier's soldier, leading from the front, sharing the hardships of his men. He fought dozens of battles, subdued tribes, and captured town after town. He was proving his worth not with words and flattery, but with actions and results. His service in Britain earned him military glory and, more importantly, the favor of Emperor Claudius. He was becoming a man to watch. But the relative stability of Claudius's reign was not to last. His personal life was a mess, marked by the betrayals of his wives, most famously Messalina and then Agrippina the Younger. It was Agrippina, ambitious and ruthless, who maneuvered her own son, Nero, into the line of succession. Claudius died in 54 AD, likely poisoned, and the 16-year-old Nero became emperor. The first few years of Nero's reign, guided by his advisors Seneca and Burrus, were actually quite stable, a period known as the Quinquennium Neronis. But like his predecessors, the poison of power began to work on Nero. He grew tired of being managed, murdered his own mother, and descended into a fantasy world of artistic ambition and tyrannical cruelty. He saw himself as a great poet, musician, and actor, and he demanded his subjects see him that way too. This created a bizarre and dangerous dilemma for senators like Vespasian. You were now required to attend the emperor's hours-long recitals and stage performances. And you had to applaud enthusiastically. Falling asleep was a capital offense. Legend has it that Vespasian, a blunt, practical soldier with little patience for bad art, did just that. He dozed off during one of Nero's performances. He was immediately banished from the court, his career seemingly over. He had survived Tiberius's paranoia and Caligula's madness, only to be brought down by an emperor's artistic ego. For a time Vespasian was disgraced, living quietly on his country estate. He had witnessed firsthand the complete unraveling of trust in Rome's leadership. The imperial throne, once a symbol of stability, was now a revolving door of paranoia, insanity, and narcissism. The unspoken contract between the emperor and the elite that he would provide order and they would provide loyal service was broken. It was a lesson Vespasian would never forget. His core philosophy was forged in this crucible of chaos. It wasn't about grand ideologies or noble bloodlines. It was about survival. Survival through loyalty when it was prudent and through quiet restraint when it was not. He learned to be patient, to endure humiliation, and to wait for his moment. He saw that true strength wasn't in flashy displays of power, but in steady competence and the loyalty you earn from the men who follow you. While living in forced retirement, he probably thought his story was over. He couldn't have known that the empire's greatest crisis was yet to come, and that his very philosophy of survival would be exactly what Rome needed to save it from self-destruction. The quiet witness was about to be called to center stage. Thanks so much for joining me for this chapter. The Julio-Claudian era is a wild ride, and seeing it through Vespasian's eyes really adds a fascinating perspective. If you're enjoying this journey, please hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, where things really start to heat up. We'll see you next time. Sound of wind, distant crashing waves, and perhaps the faint clang of metal. Hello and welcome back to our journey through the life of one of Rome's most remarkable figures. In our last chapter, we left a young man poised on the brink of destiny. Today, we cross the turbulent waters of the Channel and step onto the misty shores of a land the Romans called Britannia. This is Chapter 5, the Conquest of Britain. The year is 43 AD. The Emperor Claudius, eager to secure a military triumph to solidify his often questioned authority, sets his sights on a prize that had even eluded the great Julius Caesar, the complete conquest of Britain. To lead this monumental invasion, he needs commanders who are not just skilled, but ambitious and utterly fearless. And among them, leading the Legio II Augusta, is our man, Vespasian. Imagine the scene. For the Roman soldiers, Britain was the edge of the known world, a mysterious island shrouded in fog, inhabited by fierce, painted warriors who fought with a raw, untamed fury. The initial landing was fraught with hesitation. The legionaries, veterans of continental wars, were unnerved by the ocean crossing and the tales of the Druids and the island's savage defenders. It took the bold leadership of men like Vespasian to steel their resolve and drive them from the landing ships onto the beaches of what is now Kent. From the very first clash, Vespasian distinguished himself. While other commanders might have been content to follow the main force, he was at the vanguard, tasked with subjugating the fiercely independent tribes of the south and southwest, the Durotriges and the Aeterbates. This wasn't a land of open plains and pitched battles like those in Gaul. This was a land of dense forests, treacherous swamps, and heavily fortified hill forts. The chronicles tell us he fought over 30 battles. 30. Think about that. Not skirmishes, but full-blown engagements. He captured more than 20 oppida, or fortified towns. These weren't simple victories. Each hill fort was a fortress, often perched atop steep hills, ringed with massive earthwork defenses. Taking one required incredible tactical skill, engineering prowess to build siege equipment on the fly, and a commander who led from the front, inspiring his men to charge uphill into a hail of stones and spears. In one particularly famous engagement, Vespasian and his legion were pinned down, facing a desperate situation. He was wounded, but refused to leave the field. Leading a counterattack himself, he broke the enemy line, turning a potential disaster into a stunning victory. It was acts like this that forged an unbreakable bond between him and his soldiers. They didn't just follow his orders, they revered him. They saw his courage, his willingness to share their dangers, his refusal to ask anything of them that he wouldn't do himself. This was the foundation of the loyalty that would, decades later, carry him to the imperial throne. Let's paint a picture of this land he was conquering. It was a world away from the sun-drenched hills of Italy. Imagine Vespasian, clad in his officer's armor, rain trickling down his helmet, peering through the persistent mist at the dark silhouette of a Celtic hill fort. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and the tension of an impending assault. The sounds are the squelch of boots and mud, the low murmur of orders in Latin, and the distant, eerie war cries of the British defenders, echoing through the ancient woodlands. This was a grim, grueling campaign, a war of attrition fought one muddy ditch and one wooden palisade at a time. For his exceptional service in Britain, Vespasian was awarded the Ornamenta Triumphalia triumphal honors. This was a huge deal. It was the ancient equivalent of a ticker-tape parade, a public recognition of his military genius and valor, granted by the emperor himself. He had arrived in Britain as a competent, if relatively unknown, legate. He left as a celebrated war hero, his name spoken with respect in the Senate and in the barracks across the empire. This British campaign was more than just a series of victories on a provincial frontier, it was Vespasian's crucible. It was here, in the damp, challenging landscapes of Britain, that he proved his mettle not just as a soldier, but as a leader of men. He learned how to manage complex logistics in hostile territory, how to adapt his tactics to an unconventional enemy, and how to win the absolute devotion of his legionaries. The conquest of Britain was his first true step onto the grand stage of Roman history. He had transformed from a man with potential into a man of proven greatness. The reputation for toughness, pragmatism, and unwavering courage that he forged in the British mists would define him for the rest of his life. It was a reputation that would follow him through governorships, civil wars, and ultimately to the very pinnacle of power. The boy from Reate had become a conqueror. And that's where we'll leave our story for today. The foundation of his future fame has been laid, cemented by the blood and mud of the British campaigns. Join us next time as we follow Vespasian back to the heart of the empire, where new challenges and political intrigues await. Thank you so much for joining us on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this chapter, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of our series. We love reading your comments, so let us know what you think below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series. In our last chapter, we left Vespasian as the celebrated conqueror of Britain, a man whose military genius had expanded the Roman Empire. You'd think a hero like that would stay in the spotlight, right? Well, history, as it often does, had a different plan. This is the story of how Vespasian, the celebrated general, faded into the background, and how that obscurity became his greatest asset. This is Chapter 6, Between Fame and Obscurity. After the triumph and glory of his British campaign, Vespasian didn't climb the next rung of the political ladder in Rome. Instead, he entered a period of surprising quiet. For several years, he stepped away from the legions and the battlefields, taking on the far less glamorous role of a public administrator. Imagine going from commanding thousands of soldiers on the frontier to managing budgets and overseeing public works. It was a stark contrast, and for many in Rome's elite, it looked like a step down. His assignments were mundane, practical, and a world away from the thrill of conquest. He was involved in the nitty-gritty of keeping the empire running, the kind of work that earns little praise and even less attention. While other ambitious men were jockeying for positions in the imperial court, currying favor and making grand speeches, Vespasian was quietly learning the nuts and bolts of governance. He was mastering the spreadsheets of the ancient world, understanding the flow of grain, the maintenance of roads, and the collection of taxes. These years weren't a demotion. They were a different kind of education, one that would prove invaluable later on. His career then took him to Africa, where he served as proconsul. Now, the governorship of Africa was a prestigious post, often a stepping stone to the highest offices. But Vespasian's tenure was different. He wasn't there to win battles or build grand monuments to himself. His primary mission was to sort out the province's chaotic finances. Africa was a vital source of grain for Rome, but its administration had become bloated and inefficient. Vespasian arrived with a mandate to clean house, and he did. He approached the provincial budget with the same methodical precision he had used in his military campaigns. He cut unnecessary expenses, streamlined tax collection, and cracked down on corruption. He was famously, almost notoriously, frugal. There are stories of him being so strict with the public purse that the local populace, accustomed to more lavish governors, actually disliked him for it. They saw him as stingy, not as a responsible administrator. In one city, the citizens were reportedly so annoyed with his penny pinching that they threw turnips at him in the public square. Can you imagine? The conqueror of Britain, pelted with root vegetables because he wouldn't fund a frivolous project. This reputation for being a tight-fisted, no-nonsense manager followed him back to Rome. It defined him in the eyes of the elite. He wasn't seen as a charismatic leader or a political heavyweight. He was Vespasian, the bean counter. The guy who was good with numbers but lacked the flair and ambition of his peers. His humility, which was genuine, was mistaken for a lack of aspiration. His simple, rustic background and his frugal habits made him seem common, almost provincial, compared to the decadent aristocrats of the imperial court. And here's the crucial part. In the treacherous world of imperial Rome, being underestimated was a superpower. This period of quiet service coincided with the reign of one of Rome's most unpredictable and dangerous emperors, Nero. Nero's court was a snake pit of paranoia, jealousy, and sudden, brutal purges. To be famous, to be popular with the people or the army, was to paint a target on your back. Nero saw rivals everywhere. Brilliant generals were recalled and executed. Wealthy senators had their property confiscated on trumped-up charges. Anyone who seemed too ambitious or too capable was a threat. The court was a stage, and if you outshone the emperor, your final act was likely to be a tragic one. Think of Corbulo, another great general of the age. His successes in the East made him a hero, but that very fame made Nero so jealous and fearful that he forced Corbulo to take his own life. Fame was a death sentence. But Vespasian? No one was worried about Vespasian. He was just the guy who balanced the books in Africa, the one who got turnips thrown at him. He wasn't a threat. He didn't host lavish parties. He didn't write poetry or try to compete with Nero's artistic pretensions. He just did his job, kept his head down, and went home. There's a famous story that illustrates this perfectly. Vespasian was once part of Nero's entourage on a tour of Greece. Nero, who fancied himself a world-class musician, would force his court to attend his lengthy and reportedly terrible public performances. During one of these recitals, Vespasian, exhausted from his duties, committed the ultimate sin. He fell asleep. When Nero found out, he was furious. He banished Vespasian from his presence. For anyone else, this would have been the end. A sign of imperial disfavor, a prelude to ruin. But for Vespasian, it was a blessing in disguise. By being sent away, by being deemed too boring and unsophisticated to even appreciate the emperor's art, he was removed from the immediate danger of the court. He was out of sight, and therefore, out of Nero's paranoid mind. His obscurity was his shield. While other prominent Romans were falling victim to Nero's reign of terror, Vespasian was safe in his perceived mediocrity. The elite laughed at his simple ways. They gossiped about his stinginess. They saw him as a competent but unremarkable functionary, a man destined to retire to his family farm, not to the emperor's palace. They couldn't have been more wrong. This period, these years spent between fame and obscurity, were not a setback. They were a strategic retreat. He was honing the skills he would need to rule, not an army but an empire. He was learning about finance, logistics, and administration, the very things required to rebuild a state on the brink of collapse. And most importantly, by avoiding the spotlight, he was surviving. He was weathering the storm of Nero's tyranny, waiting patiently in the wings. The man who was once the hero of Britain had become the forgotten man of Rome. But as the empire began to spiral into chaos and civil war, Rome would soon find itself in desperate need of a leader who wasn't a flamboyant aristocrat or a paranoid tyrant, but a steady, experienced, and practical man. A man who knew the value of a balanced budget as much as the strategy of a well-planned battle. The world had forgotten about Vespasian, but his moment was coming. His time in the shadows was almost over. Thanks for joining us for this chapter. The story is just getting started, and the next phase is one of the most dramatic in Roman history. If you're enjoying this journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. We'll see you in the next video. Welcome back to our series on the Flavian Dynasty. Today we're diving into a pivotal moment in Roman history. A time of stark contrasts. The glittering decadent chaos of Emperor Nero's Rome, and the brutal, disciplined warfare brewing on the empire's eastern frontier. This is Chapter 7, Nero's Reign and the Eastern Campaigns. While Rome was a stage for Nero's extravagant artistic ambitions and spiraling paranoia, the province of Judea was a powder keg ready to explode. For years, tensions had been simmering between the local population and the Roman administration, fueled by heavy taxation, religious friction, and corrupt governance. By 66 AD, these tensions erupted into open, violent rebellion. This wasn't just a minor skirmish. It was a full-blown war that threatened to destabilize the entire region. Nero, despite his personal eccentricities, knew this was a crisis he couldn't ignore. He needed a commander who was reliable, experienced, and perhaps most importantly, not a political threat. His choice was surprising. He turned to a man who had been in a sort of forced retirement, a general who had once famously fallen asleep during one of Nero's own lyre recitals. That man was Titus Flavius Vespasianus Vespasian. Vespasian was the antithesis of the Roman elite. He was a practical, no-nonsense soldier from a humble background, known for his discipline and his financial astuteness. Some might even call it stinginess. He wasn't part of the glamorous inner circle, but his military record was undeniable. He had proven his worth decades earlier during the conquest of Britain. Now, he was being called back into the heart of the action, tasked with crushing the massive revolt in Judea. This appointment was a crucial turning point. Vespasian wasn't just going to war. He was assembling a powerhouse of military might and future political influence. He was given command of 3 legions, a formidable force, and he brought along his eldest son, Titus, to serve as one of his legates. This father-son duo would prove to be an incredibly effective team, methodically working their way through the rebellious territories. Imagine the scene. Back in Rome, Nero is hosting lavish parties, competing in athletic games, and eliminating perceived rivals with ruthless abandon. The city is a whirlwind of excess and fear. The Great Fire of 64 AD had already devastated the capital, and Nero's subsequent construction of his opulent golden house on the ruins did little to endear him to the populace. The government was teetering, and the treasury was being drained to fund the emperor's grandiose lifestyle. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the east, Vespasian and Titus are operating with surgical precision. They aren't interested in theatrical displays. They are focused on logistics, siege warfare, and grinding down the enemy. Their campaign began in Galilee, where they systematically captured one fortified town after another. The historian Josephus, who was a leader of the Jewish forces in Galilee before his capture, provides a vivid, first-hand account of the Roman military machine in action. He describes the unwavering discipline of the legions, the terrifying effectiveness of their siege engines, and the grim determination of their commander. Vespasian's leadership style stood in stark contrast to the chaos emanating from the capital. Where Nero was impulsive and self-indulgent, Vespasian was patient and methodical. Where Nero's court was rife with intrigue and backstabbing, Vespasian's camp was a model of military order. He earned the respect and loyalty of his soldiers not through grand speeches, but through shared hardship and competent command. He was one of them, a soldier's general. This campaign was more than just a military operation. It was the crucible that forged the next dynasty. While Vespasian was quelling the rebellion, he was also building a powerful base of support. The legions under his command, including those of the governors of neighboring provinces like Syria, became intensely loyal to him. They saw in him the stability and strength that was so clearly lacking in the emperor. Little did anyone know, as Vespasian meticulously planned his sieges in the dusty hills of Judea, that he was laying the groundwork for his own ascent. The seeds of destiny were being quietly sown in the east. Every victory he won, every fortress he took, enhanced his reputation and highlighted Nero's incompetence. The soldiers, the governors, and even influential figures back in Rome began to see Vespasian not just as a successful general, but as a potential savior for a troubled empire. The First Jewish-Roman War was a brutal, grinding conflict that would have lasting consequences for the region. But for Vespasian, it was the final critical step on his path to power. He was far from the political machinations of the Senate, but his actions echoed all the way back to Rome. The disciplined legions of the East were becoming a political force in their own right, and their commander was a man whose time was about to come. The decadent era of Nero was hurtling towards its inevitable dramatic conclusion, and from the ashes, a new leader, forged in the fires of war, was preparing to rise. Join us next time as the crisis in Rome deepens, Nero's reign collapses, and the empire is plunged into the chaotic Year of the Four Emperors, setting the stage for Vespasian's ultimate bid for the throne. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Roman history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we delve into a siege that wasn't just about stone and steel, but about the collision of two brilliant military minds and a prophecy that would change the course of an empire. This is the story of the siege of Jotapata. In the year 67 AD, the rugged hills of Galilee became the stage for a dramatic standoff. On one side, the unstoppable Roman war machine, led by the pragmatic and experienced general, Vespasian. On the other, the Jewish rebels, holed up in the fortified city of Jotapata, commanded by a clever and resourceful leader named Josephus. You might recognize that name. He's the very historian whose writings allow us to tell this story today. The First Jewish-Roman War was in full swing, and Rome was not in a forgiving mood. After the humiliation of a legion's defeat in Jerusalem, Emperor Nero had dispatched Vespasian with a simple, brutal objective: crush the rebellion. Vespasian, along with his son Titus, brought 3 legions, tens of thousands of highly trained soldiers, to bear on Galilee, the heartland of the revolt. Their first major target was Jotapata. Now, Roman warfare wasn't always the lightning-fast blitz you might imagine. Vespasian was a master of the slow, methodical grind. He wasn't interested in a heroic, costly charge against the city's formidable walls. Instead, he embraced the quiet, suffocating patience of a proper Roman siege. Think of it less as a single battle and more as a massive, lethal construction project. The legions arrived and immediately began their work. They surrounded the city, cutting off all escape routes and supply lines. An earth and timber rampart was built, encircling Jotapata completely. From this wall, Roman archers, slingers, and catapults could rain down a constant, morale-breaking barrage of projectiles. Life inside the city became a living nightmare. Every trip to the well, every moment in the open, carried the risk of death from above. But Josephus and his men were not passive victims. They were fighters. They launched daring nighttime raids, attempting to burn the Roman siege engines and disrupt their construction. Josephus, ever the innovator, came up with ingenious defenses. He ordered his men to douse the Roman ramps with boiling fenugreek, a slippery plant that sent the attacking legionaries tumbling down the slopes. He had his soldiers hang wet animal hides over the walls to absorb the impact of the battering rams. For every Roman move, Josephus seemed to have a counter-move. The siege dragged on for weeks. The Romans built their siege ramp higher and higher, a monumental earthen staircase aimed directly at the city's weak points. The defenders fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. Water was running desperately low inside the city, and the psychological toll was immense. Josephus describes scenes of desperation and valor, a city slowly being strangled but refusing to die. Finally, after 47 grueling days, the Roman patience paid off. Under the cover of a pre-dawn mist, Titus led a small group of soldiers who managed to scale a section of the wall that had been damaged. The sentries, exhausted from the relentless siege, were caught off guard. Once a foothold was gained, the floodgates opened. The legions poured into Jotapata, and the methodical siege turned into a brutal sack of the city. The Roman soldiers, enraged by the long and costly resistance, showed little mercy. In the chaos, Josephus and a handful of his top commanders managed to hide in a secret cistern. For days, they remained hidden while the Romans scoured the ruins above. But their sanctuary soon became a trap. As their discovery seemed inevitable, his companions proposed a pact of mass suicide, believing it was a more honorable end than capture. This is where Josephus's story takes its most controversial turn. He argued against suicide, but seeing his companions were resolute, he proposed a system to make it fair. They would draw lots, killing each other one by one until only one remained to take his own life. Whether by luck or by clever manipulation of the process, Josephus and one other man were the last two left alive. He then persuaded the final man to surrender with him to the Romans. Brought before Vespasian, Josephus wasn't just another defeated rebel leader. He was something else entirely. Instead of begging for his life, he made a bold, almost insane proclamation. He addressed Vespasian not as a general, but as a future emperor. He prophesied that Vespasian and his son Titus would soon wear the imperial purple of Rome. Imagine the scene. A captured rebel, his city in ruins, his people slaughtered, telling one of Rome's most powerful generals that he is destined to rule the world. Vespasian was a superstitious man, as many Romans were. He was intrigued. Instead of executing Josephus on the spot, he decided to keep him as a prisoner, perhaps as a curiosity, perhaps to see if this strange prediction held any weight. He kept the prophet in chains, but he kept him alive. This act of clemency, born from a moment of audacious prophecy, would have monumental consequences. Josephus would go on to serve as an advisor and translator for the Romans, witnessing the rest of the war from the other side. But the bigger story was unfolding back in Rome. The empire was spiraling into chaos. Emperor Nero's reign ended, plunging Rome into a bloody civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors. One emperor after another rose and fell in rapid succession. The legions in the east, tired of the instability and loyal to their own commander, saw an opportunity. They looked at Vespasian, a proven, steady, and successful general, and they saw an emperor. In 69 AD, the legions in Judea and across the eastern provinces declared Vespasian emperor. The prophecy of the captured rebel from Jotapata had come true. The siege was a military victory for Rome, a showcase of its engineering and relentless persistence. But the surrender of Josephus transformed it into something more. It became the unlikely launching point for a new imperial dynasty, the Flavians, and it saved the life of the man who would become the primary historian of the entire conflict. Without the events at Jotapata, our knowledge of this pivotal war would be immeasurably poorer. A quiet, patient siege had ended with a prophecy that echoed across the entire Roman world. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to our journey through Roman history. Today, we arrive at a moment of fire, chaos, and ultimate transformation. The dramatic fall of the last Julio-Claudian emperor, Nero. If you thought the story of Rome was wild before, buckle up because things are about to get truly chaotic. So, where did we leave off? Nero was on the throne, a figure of extravagance, artistic ambition, and growing paranoia. But in 64 AD, a catastrophe struck that would forever be linked with his name: the Great Fire of Rome. For 6 days and 7 nights, flames devoured the heart of the city. Entire districts were wiped off the map, leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. Now, was Nero really playing the fiddle while Rome burned? Probably not. That's likely a later embellishment. Historical accounts say he was at his villa in Antium when the fire started, but rushed back to Rome to organize relief efforts, opening his palaces to the homeless and bringing in food supplies. But the damage was done, not just to the city, but to his reputation. Rumors swirled that Nero himself had started the fire to clear land for his ambitious new building project, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This was a palace complex of such mind-boggling scale and luxury that it made people furious. While they were living in squalor, he was planning a personal paradise built on the ashes of their homes. To deflect the blame, Nero needed a scapegoat. He found one in a small, misunderstood religious sect known as the Christians. A brutal persecution followed, a dark chapter that only fueled the growing resentment against him. His lavish spending on the Golden House and public works also emptied the state's treasury. To refill it, he devalued the currency and seized wealth from the rich, creating powerful enemies among the senatorial class. The political temperature in Rome was reaching a boiling point. The fire hadn't just burned buildings. It had burned away the last remnants of Nero's political support. The first major crack in his rule appeared in 68 AD. The governor of Gaul, a man named Vindex, openly rebelled. He didn't want the throne for himself, but instead declared his support for Galba, the respected governor of Spain. Initially, Nero dismissed the revolt, joking about it in his typical fashion. But this was no joke. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Soon the legions in Spain hailed Galba as emperor. Even more devastating for Nero, the Praetorian Guard, his own personal bodyguards in Rome, was bribed to abandon him. Suddenly, the most powerful man in the world was utterly alone. The Senate, smelling blood in the water, declared Nero a public enemy. This was essentially a death sentence. Hunted and terrified, Nero fled the city. His final hours were a pathetic scene. Hiding in a freedman's villa outside Rome, he agonized over taking his own life. He reportedly lamented, "What an artist dies in me," as he hesitated. Finally, hearing the hoofbeats of the soldiers sent to execute him, he forced his private secretary to help him plunge a dagger into his throat. His death in June of 68 AD was not just the end of a man. It was the end of an era. With him, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the family of Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Clodius, was extinguished forever. But the death of a tyrant doesn't automatically bring peace. In fact, it created a massive power vacuum. And as we know, nature in Roman politics abhors a vacuum. This plunged the empire into one of its most turbulent periods ever, the Year of the Four Emperors. The first of these emperors was Galba, the man whose rebellion started it all. He marched to Rome with high hopes. But he was old, stern, and incredibly out of touch. He refused to pay the Praetorian Guard the bonus they had been promised for their support, a catastrophic mistake. He also alienated the powerful German legions by replacing their commander. His reign was short and unpopular. In January of 69 AD, just 7 months after Nero's death, the Praetorians had had enough. They found a new candidate, a wealthy and influential senator named Otho, who had been an early supporter of Galba but felt overlooked. The guards murdered Galba in the Romang Forum and proclaimed Otho the new emperor. So, Emperor number 2 Otho is now on the throne. But there's a problem. Before Otho seized power in Rome, the legions on the Rhine frontier in Germany had already declared their own commander, Vitellius, as emperor. Now, there were 2 men claiming the title, and the only way to settle it was with a civil war. Vitellius's armies marched down into Italy. In April of 69 AD, their forces clashed with Otho's at the Battle of the Dryacum. Otho's army was decisively defeated. Seeing his cause as lost and wanting to prevent further bloodshed, Otho took his own life after ruling for just 3 months. This brings us to Emperor number 3, Vitellius. He entered Rome not as a savior, but as a conqueror at the head of a rowdy and undisciplined army. Vitellius himself was known more for his gluttony and extravagance than for his leadership. He spent his short reign feasting and rewarding his followers, quickly draining what was left of the Roman treasury. His incompetence and the behavior of his troops made him deeply unpopular, both with the people and the elites. It was clear he was not the man to restore order. The empire was still bleeding, and another contender was about to enter the ring. All this time, while civil war raged in the West, a highly competent and respected general had been patiently waiting in the East. His name was Vespasian. He was in Judea, putting down a major revolt. He was a man from a humble background, not a traditional Roman aristocrat, but he was a brilliant military commander with a loyal and battle-hardened army under his command. He had watched the chaos unfold from afar. He saw Galba's stinginess, Otho's ambition, and Vitellius's incompetence. and he saw his opportunity. In July of 69 AD, the legions in Egypt, a critical province that controlled Rome's grain supply, declared Vespasian emperor. He was quickly followed by the legions in Judea and Syria. Vespasian had a brilliant strategy. He didn't immediately march on Rome. Instead, he secured the east and sent his supporter Mucianus with an army towards Italy. He himself went to Egypt to cut off the grain supply to Rome, putting immense pressure on Vitellius. The forces loyal to Vespasian, led by the general Antonius Primus, moved faster than anyone expected. They met Vitellius's army at the Second Battle of Bedriacum in October of 69 AD. The fighting was brutal and lasted through the night, but Vespasian's legions were victorious. Vitellius's power collapsed. He tried to abdicate, but his own supporters wouldn't let him. The final horrifying battle was fought in the streets of Rome itself, as Vespasian's forces entered the city. Vitellius was dragged from his hiding place, humiliated, killed, and his body thrown into the Tiber, and so, by the end of 69 AD, the fourth and final emperor of that chaotic year, Vespasian, was the undisputed master of the Roman world. The year of the four emperors was over. It had been a brutal, bloody lesson for the empire. It showed that emperors could now be made not just in Rome, but by the legions in the provinces. Power no longer belonged solely to the old aristocratic families. It belonged to whoever could command the strongest army. Vespasian's victory marked the beginning of a new dynasty, the Flavians. He would bring stability, repair the damage of the civil war, and even begin the construction of one of Rome's most iconic landmarks, the Colosseum. The fall of Nero had unleashed a storm that nearly tore the empire apart, but from its wreckage, a new order emerged, proving once again the incredible resilience of Rome. What a whirlwind! From a burning city to a succession of short-lived emperors, this chapter has it all. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this dive into Roman chaos, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll explore the rise of the Flavian Dynasty. See you next time. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Today, we journey back to one of the most turbulent, chaotic, and downright insane years in Roman history. 69 AD, better known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Imagine a year where the imperial throne wasn't just a seat of power, but a revolving door of ambition, betrayal, and bloodshed. The dust had barely settled on the dramatic end of Emperor Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Rome, for the first time in nearly a century, was without a clear successor. The stability Augustus had painstakingly built seemed to be crumbling into dust, and the very foundation of the empire was shaken to its core. Who would fill this power vacuum? The Senate? The people? No. The answer came from the legions. The armies, stationed across the vast empire, realized a dangerous new truth. An emperor could be made elsewhere than Rome, and so began a deadly game of thrones, where loyalty was fleeting and the price of power was often one's own life. The first to seize the purple was Servius Sulpicius Galba, a respected, elderly governor from Spain. He seemed like a safe bet. He was a man of old-fashioned Roman virtues, disciplined and frugal. Too frugal, as it turned out. Upon arriving in Rome, Galba made a series of critical mistakes. He refused to pay the traditional bonus, the donative, promised to the Praetorian Guard who had supported his rise. He executed soldiers and allies without trial, earning a reputation for cruelty and avarice. The people of Rome, who had hoped for a generous new leader after Nero, were disappointed. The soldiers, who had expected reward, felt betrayed. Galba's austerity wasn't seen as responsible governance. It was seen as stinginess. He was trying to refill the treasury that Nero had emptied, but in doing so, he emptied his reserves of goodwill. His reign was doomed before it had truly begun. Watching from the wings was Marcus Salvius Otho, a former friend of Nero and a man of immense ambition. Otho had supported Galba, hoping to be named his heir. But Galba, ever the traditionalist, instead adopted a young nobleman named Piso Licinianus. This was the final straw for Otho. Feeling slighted and seeing an opportunity, he turned to the disgruntled Praetorian Guard. With promises of the gold that Galba had denied them, Otho conspired to overthrow the aging emperor. In a shocking turn of events, on January 15, 69 AD, the Praetorians marched into the Roman Forum, found Galba, and ended his short 7-month reign in a brutal display of force. Galba and his heir Piso were cut down. The Senate, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had little choice but to recognize Otho as the new emperor. Rome had its second emperor in less than a month, but Otho's celebration was short-lived. News of Galba's rise had already prompted another contender to make his move. On the Rhine frontier, the powerful legions of Germania had their own candidate, their commander, Aulus Vitellius. Vitellius was known more for his gluttony and easy-going nature than his military prowess, but his men adored him. They had declared him emperor even before Galba's death, and now their forces were marching on Italy. The empire was split. Otho controlled Rome and the Praetorian Guard, while Vitellius commanded the veteran legions of the Rhine. Civil war was no longer a threat, it was a reality. Otho, to his credit, tried to avoid further bloodshed. He offered Vitellius a peaceful partnership, but it was too late. The armies were on the move and honor was at stake. Otho scrambled to assemble his forces to meet the challenge. The two sides clashed at the First Battle of Bedriacum in northern Italy. Despite a spirited defense, Otho's forces were decisively defeated. Upon hearing the news, Otho made a startling decision. Rather than prolong the civil war and cause more Roman-on-Roman violence, he chose to take his own life. His supporters were stunned. He had ruled for only 3 months, but his final act was seen by many as a noble sacrifice to spare the state further chaos. And so, Rome had its third emperor of the year. Vitellius entered Rome not as a general, but as a victor in a civil war. His reign quickly devolved into a parody of imperial authority. He was infamous for his extravagant banquets and his lack of interest in the actual administration of the empire. He rewarded his soldiers handsomely, further draining the treasury, and placed his loyal but often incompetent friends in positions of power. While Vitellius and his court feasted, the soldiers, senators, and citizens grew increasingly disillusioned. The rapid succession of rulers, the bloodshed, and the blatant disregard for tradition were eroding faith in Rome itself. It felt as if the empire was rudderless, lurching from one crisis to another, led by men who were either too old, too ambitious, or too self-indulgent. The promise of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, felt like a distant memory. But far away in the east another power was stirring. In the province of Judea, a seasoned and highly respected general was commanding a massive army tasked with putting down a major rebellion. His name was Titus Flavius Vespasianus Vespasian. He was not a traditional aristocrat, but a down-to-earth, pragmatic soldier who had risen through the ranks on merit. His legions in Judea, along with the armies stationed in Syria and Egypt, were growing restless. They watched the chaos unfolding in Rome with disgust. Their commander, Vespasian, was far more capable and worthy of the throne than the gluttonous Vitellius. They were loyal not to the distant emperor in Rome, but to the general who led them, who ate with them, and who fought beside them. The moment came in July of 69 AD. The legions in Egypt, under the command of Tiberius Julius Alexander, proclaimed Vespasian as emperor. Soon after, his own armies in Judea followed suit. The powerful eastern legions had thrown their hat into the ring. They had the manpower, the resources, and most importantly, the grain supply from Egypt, which was Rome's breadbasket. By controlling Egypt, Vespasian could starve the capital into submission. The final, decisive phase of the civil war was about to begin. It was no longer just a power grab. It was a battle for the soul of Rome, a fight for legitimacy. Vespasian, ever the strategist, did not rush to Rome himself. He remained in the east to secure his power base, sending his allies and generals, like Antonius Primus, to march on Italy. The Danubian legions, who despised Vitellius, quickly joined Vespasian's cause. The stage was set for another climactic confrontation. Vitellius's forces, weakened by indulgence and poor leadership, were no match for the disciplined and motivated Flavian armies. The two sides met at the Second Battle of Bedriacum. It was a brutal and bloody affair, but the outcome was a crushing victory for Vespasian's forces. The path to Rome was now open. Vitellius's authority evaporated. As the Flavian army approached the city, chaos erupted. In a desperate attempt to cling to power, Vitellius's supporters fought a brutal battle in the streets of Rome itself. The city burned, and the sacred temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill was destroyed in the fighting, a terrible omen. Finally, the Flavian soldiers stormed the palace. Vitellius was dragged from his hiding place, paraded through the streets while being pelted with filth, and then unceremoniously executed. His body was thrown into the Tiber River on December 21, 69 AD, The Senate officially recognized Vespasian as the new emperor. The year of the four emperors was finally over. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and now Vespasian. 1 year, 4 rulers, and a devastating civil war. Rome had been pushed to the brink, but it had survived. With Vespasian, a new era began. He would bring stability, restore the state's finances, and begin a new dynasty, the Flavians. The year 69 AD served as a harsh lesson. The empire was only as strong as the man who led it, and the loyalty of the legions was the ultimate key to power. Thank you so much for joining me on this dive into one of Rome's wildest years. It's a stark reminder that history is often stranger and more dramatic than any fiction. If you enjoyed this, please consider hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past. Let me know in the comments which emperor you think had the best claim to the throne. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the Flavian Dynasty. We've reached a pivotal moment in Roman history. The year of the four emperors is hurtling towards its dramatic conclusion. Today, we delve into Chapter 11, the March on Rome. This isn't just a military campaign. It's the final desperate push to end a year of brutal civil war and bring a new hope to a weary empire. So grab your seat, because the fate of Rome hangs in the balance. While the armies of Vitellius and Vespasian clashed in bloody battles across Italy, Vespasian himself was far away in the east, in Alexandria, Egypt. Imagine the scene. Rome is in turmoil. Legions are fighting and dying for his cause, but the man of the hour is orchestrating it all from a distance. This wasn't a sign of cowardice or detachment. It was a masterstroke of political and strategic genius. By controlling Egypt, Vespasian held Rome's grain supply in his hands. He could starve the capital into submission without shedding a drop of blood on its streets. This gave him immense leverage and showcased his preference for strategy over brute force. While Vespasian managed the larger political game, his supporters in Italy were anything but idle. They weren't a disorganized mob. They were a coalition of some of Rome's most capable generals and governors, united by a quiet, steely determination. Figures like Antonius Primus and Mucianus were the engines of this advance. They understood that this wasn't just another power grab. They were fighting for the very soul of the empire, for a return to stability after the chaos that followed Nero's fall. Their march wasn't just a geographical advance. It was a moral one. Each town they secured was another step away from the abyss of civil war. The March on Rome was far from a simple victory parade. It was a slow, grueling, and incredibly bloody struggle. The forces loyal to the ruling Emperor Vitellius were not going to give up easily. They were seasoned soldiers, fighting for their commander and their own survival. The Second Battle of Bedriacum, near Cremona, was a particularly horrific engagement. It was a night battle, fought with desperate ferocity by both sides, a brutal clash between fellow Romans. The aftermath was devastating. The city of Cremona was sacked and burned, a tragic reminder of the terrible cost of civil war. This wasn't a clean, heroic campaign. It was a gritty, painful fight for every inch of ground, a testament to how deeply the divisions had fractured the Roman legions. Throughout this brutal campaign, word from Vespasian in the east was crucial. He wasn't just a distant figurehead. He was an active commander-in-chief. Couriers raced back and forth, carrying his directives and, more importantly, his vision. From Alexandria, he maintained a remarkable composure. While others might have been consumed by ambition or anxiety, Vespasian remained focused on the long-term goal. He received news of victories and setbacks with the same steady hand, constantly planning the next move. This calm demeanor was infectious. It reassured his commanders on the ground and sent a clear message to the people of Rome. This wasn't another capricious tyrant seeking power, but a seasoned, stable leader ready to govern. His composure under immense pressure was, in itself, a promise of the stability he hoped to bring. As Vespasian's forces, led by the audacious Antonius Primus, closed in on Rome, a critical choice had to be made. Would they storm the city seeking vengeance on Vitellius and his supporters, or would they prioritize peace? Vespasian's instructions were clear. His primary goal was not revenge. It was the restoration of order. He repeatedly emphasized this in his communications. He wanted to end the bloodshed, not prolong it. This was a radical departure from the cycle of proscriptions and purges that had followed previous civil wars. Vespasian was signaling that his reign would be different. He wasn't interested in settling old scores. He was interested in healing a fractured empire. This message resonated deeply with a populace exhausted by a year of constant conflict and uncertainty. They didn't want another bloodbath. They wanted a ruler who could bring back peace and security. The final days of Vitellius's reign were a chaotic, desperate spectacle. As Antonius Primus's legions stood at the gates of Rome, Vitellius wavered, attempting to abdicate and then being forced back onto the throne by his own panicked soldiers and the city mob. What followed was a brutal street-by-street battle for the capital itself. The fighting reached the Capitoline Hill, the sacred heart of Rome, where the revered temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus was burned to the ground, a shocking act of sacrilege that horrified the Roman world. It was the ultimate symbol of the chaos and self-destruction of the civil war. Finally, Vitellius was captured, dragged through the streets, and brutally killed. His death marked the grim and bloody end to the year of the 4 emperors. With Vitellius gone, the path was clear for Vespasian. But the city he was set to inherit was wounded, traumatized, and deeply scarred. The fighting had ceased, but the air was thick with tension and grief. The dream of stability, which had seemed so distant just months before, was now within reach. Vespasian's supporters, acting on his behalf, immediately began the difficult work of restoring order. They secured the city, calmed the populace, and started to lay the groundwork for the new administration. The emphasis was always on reconciliation and rebuilding, not on retribution. The Senate quickly and formally recognized Vespasian as the new emperor, legitimizing his victory and officially ending the period of anarchy. Vespasian's slow, deliberate approach had paid off. He had won the war not just with swords but with strategy, patience, and a clear vision for the future. He didn't enter Rome as a conquering warlord but as a restorer of peace. His arrival a few months later was not a moment of triumph over a defeated foe, but a moment of collective relief for an empire that had stared into the abyss and pulled back. The march on Rome was the painful, necessary surgery that removed the cancer of civil war. It was the foundation upon which Vespasian would build a new era of peace and prosperity, the Flavian Dynasty, and give the Roman Empire the stability it so desperately craved. It was the end of a nightmare and the dawn of a new hope. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of Rome's most turbulent years. The story of Vespasian is a powerful lesson in leadership and perseverance. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. We love hearing from you, so drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the Roman emperors. Today, we arrive at a pivotal moment in Roman history, a moment of profound crisis and unexpected renewal. We're in the year 69 AD, the infamous year of the 4 emperors, and Rome is on its knees. After a brutal and chaotic civil war, a new man is marching towards the city. Not a high-born patrician from an ancient family, but a tough, seasoned general named Titus Flavius Vespasianus. This is Chapter 12, Emperor of a Broken Empire. Imagine the scene. Vespasian, fresh from his campaigns in the east, finally enters Rome. But this isn't a triumphant parade into a glorious capital. He finds the city scarred by fire, its streets still echoing with the sounds of recent street battles. The magnificent Capitoline Temple, the very heart of Roman religion and statehood, lies in smoking ruins, torched during the fighting between the forces of Vitellius and his own supporters. The treasury is not just empty, it's deeply in debt. The grain supply is precarious. The people are weary, their morale shattered by a year of constant bloodshed and instability. The Senate, once a proud and powerful body, is cowed and uncertain. The legions, the backbone of the empire, are fractured, their loyalties tested and their discipline in tatters. Rome, the master of the world, is a broken shell of its former self. This was the inheritance Vespasian claimed. It was less a prize and more a monumental burden. Many would have despaired, but Vespasian was not like other men. He was a pragmatist, a man of action, forged in the harsh realities of military life, not the decadent courts of Nero or his successors. He was exactly the emperor Rome needed, even if it didn't know it yet. Where does one even begin to fix a broken empire? For Vespasian, the answer was simple: with the money. He famously said, "Pecunia non olet," money does not stink, and he lived by that motto. His first and most urgent task was to refill the state coffers. This wasn't about personal greed. It was about survival. Without money, he couldn't pay the soldiers, rebuild the city, or feed the populace. So he got to work with a ruthless and sometimes unpopular efficiency. He raised existing taxes and invented new ones. One of the most famous, or perhaps infamous, was a tax on public urinals. When his own son, Titus, expressed his disgust at the idea, Vespasian held a coin under his nose and asked if it smelled. When Titus said no, Vespasian delivered his legendary reply. The message was clear. The source of the money was irrelevant. Its utility was everything. He audited the state's finances with an eagle eye, cutting wasteful spending and reclaiming public land that had been illegally privatized. He was meticulous. He was tough, and slowly, painstakingly, the treasury began to recover. These weren't glamorous actions, but they were the foundation upon which everything else would be built. He understood that an empire, no matter how mighty, runs on cold, hard cash. With the finances beginning to stabilize, Vespasian turned his attention to another festering wound, the army. The civil wars had poisoned the legions. Soldiers had become kingmakers, their loyalty for sale to the highest bidder. Discipline had evaporated, replaced by arrogance and entitlement. Vespasian, a soldier's soldier, knew this could not stand. He couldn't afford a Praetorian guard that thought it could appoint and depose emperors at will. He began a systematic overhaul. Legions that had shown disloyalty or poor discipline were disbanded or merged with more reliable units. He purged the officer corps of untrustworthy men, promoting experienced and loyal commanders, many of whom, like himself, were from outside the traditional Roman aristocracy. He made it clear that the army served the state, not the other way around. He also put the soldiers to work. Instead of letting them idle in camps, becoming restless and prone to plotting, he used them as a massive labor force for his public works projects. Soldiers helped clear rubble, quarry stone, and build roads. This not only kept them busy, but also contributed directly to the reconstruction effort, giving them a tangible stake in the renewal of the empire. It was a brilliant move that restored both discipline and purpose to the Roman military machine. But rebuilding an empire isn't just about money and soldiers. It's about restoring spirit, dignity, and a sense of shared identity. Vespasian understood the power of symbolism. His very presence, a sturdy, down-to-earth, 60-year-old man with a plain-spoken manner, was a stark contrast to the decadent, detached emperors who preceded him. He lived relatively modestly and worked tirelessly, setting an example for the entire administration. His most significant symbolic act was the immediate decision to rebuild the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. He is said to have personally helped clear the first basket of rubble from the site, a powerful gesture showing that this was a collective effort, led from the very top. This wasn't just about restoring a building. It was about restoring faith, showing the people and the gods that Rome's Sacred Heart would beat again. He also embarked on a massive building program across the city. While the most famous project, the Colosseum, would be completed by his sons, its construction began under his reign. This amphitheater, built on the site of Nero's extravagant private lake, was a powerful statement. It was a gift back to the Roman people, a place of public entertainment for all, replacing the self-indulgent excess of a hated tyrant. He was literally and figuratively giving Rome back to the Romans. Through these deliberate, practical, and symbolic actions, Vespasian did more than just repair a broken state. He founded a new dynasty, the Flavian Dynasty. It was a dynasty not born of divine ancestry or ancient patrician lineage, but forged from grit, competence, and a profound sense of duty. After the Julio-Claudian line ended in chaos and the subsequent civil war tore the empire apart, Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian, brought a new era of stability and practicality. This was a turning point. The Principate was no longer the exclusive property of a single, quasi-royal family. It was now open to any man with the military backing and administrative skill to seize and hold it. Vespasian's rise proved that a new man, an Italian from the municipal class, could rule as effectively, if not more so, than any blue-blooded aristocrat. He stabilized the frontiers, reformed the state, and initiated a cultural and architectural renewal. He wasn't a glamorous emperor, no poet or philosopher on the throne. He was a builder, a manager, a fixer. He was the sturdy, reliable foundation that the Roman Empire desperately needed to survive and thrive for centuries to come. He found Rome in brick and rubble, and he began the process of leaving it in marble once more, setting the stage for a new age of prosperity. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the legacy of Vespasian. He may not be as famous as Augustus or as infamous as Nero, but his impact was just as profound. He was the emperor who saved Rome from itself. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue exploring the fascinating history of the Roman Empire, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Vespasian in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through Roman history. Today, we're diving into Chapter 13, the Flavian Vision, exploring the mind and methods of the man who saved Rome from itself, Emperor Vespasian. After the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, Rome was on its knees, bankrupt and broken. It needed a leader, not another tyrant. What it got was a soldier, a pragmatist, and, believe it or not, a man with a sense of humor. Vespasian's philosophy for ruling was a radical departure from the extravagance of his predecessors, especially Nero. He believed in three core principles: simplicity, justice, and humor. This wasn't just a political slogan. It was his way of life. He came from humble origins and he never forgot it. He understood that to rebuild an empire, you couldn't start with golden palaces. You had to start with the foundations of trust and stability. His first and most critical task was rebuilding public trust. The Roman people were tired of civil war, weary of emperors who saw the treasury as their personal piggy bank. Vespasian immediately set a new tone. He lived modestly, worked tirelessly, and made himself accessible. He didn't hide behind legions of guards or layers of bureaucracy. Instead, he engaged with the Senate, respected its traditions, and worked with its members rather than against them. He started by leading by example, showing that the emperor was a servant of the state, not its master. This simple act of showing up and doing the work began to mend the fractured relationship between the ruler and the ruled. One of Vespasian's most famous and at the time, most criticized traits was his frugality. To put it plainly, the man was cheap, but in the best possible way. The imperial treasury was empty, and Vespasian knew that drastic measures were needed. He famously said, "Pecunia non olet," which means money does not stink. This was his response to his son Titus, who complained about a new tax on public toilets. Vespasian's point was clear. The state needed money, and every source was fair game if it meant saving Rome from bankruptcy. He slashed extravagant court spending, auctioned off Nero's luxurious furniture, and cancelled lavish projects that served only to glorify the emperor. He was unafraid to look stingy if it meant the empire could pay its soldiers and fund essential services. This dislike for luxury was a core part of his character. He preferred the simple fare of a soldier to the exotic banquets of the court. This wasn't just a public relations stunt. It was genuinely who he was. And this attitude trickled down, creating a new culture of fiscal responsibility in Rome. People saw an emperor who was tightening his own belt, which made it easier for them to accept the new taxes and austerity measures. This modesty was the key ingredient in the empire's recovery. Vespasian wasn't just rebuilding buildings. He was rebuilding Rome's character. His most significant project, the Colosseum, is a perfect example. It was built on the land where Nero had constructed his opulent golden house. By tearing down a symbol of private indulgence and building a magnificent amphitheater for the public, Vespasian sent a powerful message: Rome belongs to its people. This wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of the new Flavian era. It was a vision of an empire built not for the whims of one man, but for the benefit of all its citizens. Vespasian's down-to-earth nature also made him more relatable. He was known for his blunt, soldierly humor. When he was on his deathbed, suffering from a fever, he reportedly joked, "V. Puto dias fio," which translates to, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god." Even in his final moments, he was poking fun at the Roman tradition of deifying emperors. This wit and lack of pretension made him human. People didn't just respect him, many came to genuinely like him. They saw a man who, despite holding absolute power, never lost touch with his common roots. His focus on justice was equally important. He overhauled the legal system, clearing a backlog of court cases that had piled up during the Civil War. He appointed new judges based on merit, not connections, and worked to ensure that the law was applied fairly across the social classes. For a society that had seen justice become a tool of the powerful, this was a profound change. It restored faith in the state's ability to protect its citizens and resolve disputes peacefully. This legal stability was just as crucial as the financial stability he was building. Vespasian's vision was a long-term one. He wasn't just patching up the empire for a few years. He was laying the groundwork for a new dynasty, the Flavian Dynasty. He secured the succession for his sons, Titus and Domitian, ensuring a smooth transition of power and avoiding the kind of power vacuum that had led to the last civil war. He understood that stability required a clear line of succession. His practical, no-nonsense approach ensured that his vision would outlive him, carried on by his sons who had learned from his example. Looking back, Vespasian's reign was the turning point Rome desperately needed. He inherited an empire in flames, and through sheer force of will, practicality, and a surprisingly humble character, he extinguished the fire and began to rebuild. He showed that true power wasn't found in luxury or divine pronouncements, but in diligent work, fiscal discipline, and a genuine commitment to the public good. His simple, frugal, and just approach didn't just save the Roman economy. It restored the very soul of the empire, proving that sometimes the most effective leader isn't the most glamorous one, but the most sensible. Thank you so much for joining me today as we explored the Flavian vision. It's a testament to how one person's character can shape the destiny of millions. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next chapter in this incredible story. We'll see you next time. Hello and welcome back to our series on the Roman emperors. Today, we're diving into Chapter 14, Rebuilding Rome. After the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, Rome was a city scarred by civil war and neglect. The capital had been burned, the treasury was empty, and the morale of the people was at an all-time low. But then, a new emperor, Vespasian, took the helm. He wasn't a noble from Rome's ancient families, but a practical, down-to-earth soldier. And he knew exactly what the city needed. A complete and total overhaul. Vespasian's first priority was to restore not just the buildings, but the very soul of Rome. He embarked on one of the most ambitious public works programs the city had ever seen. The capital, the religious heart of the empire, was his first project. He symbolically participated in the cleanup himself, carrying away of the rubble to show that this was a collective effort. Soon, construction crews were swarming the city. Temples that had fallen into disrepair were restored to their former glory, and new ones were built, like the magnificent Temple of Peace, to celebrate the end of the civil wars. But Vespasian's visions went far beyond religious monuments. He understood that a great city needed great infrastructure. He repaired and extended Rome's legendary network of roads, ensuring that commerce and communication could flow freely throughout the empire. He also focused on the aqueducts, those engineering marvels that supplied to the city's fountains, baths, and homes. By ensuring a clean and reliable water supply, he wasn't just improving sanitation. He was improving the quality of life for every single Roman, from the richest senator to the poorest citizen. This wasn't just about making Rome look good. It was about making Rome work again. Now, you might be wondering, where did all the money for this massive rebuilding esfuerzo come from? Remember, the treasury was bankrupt when Vespasian came to power. This is where his genius for financial management shines. Vespasian was famously, or perhaps infamously, frugal. He cut unnecessary expenses, reclaimed public land that had been illegally occupied by private individuals, and most importantly, he reformed the entire taxation system. He wasn't afraid to introduce new, and sometimes unpopular, taxes. The most famous of these was the vectigal urinae, or the urine tax. Public toilets in Rome collected urine, which was then sold to tanners for use in their work. Vespasian decided the state should get a cut. When his own son, Titus, complained that this was a disgusting way to raise money, Vespasian reportedly held a gold coin under his nose and asked if it smelled bad. When Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "And yet, it comes from urine." This famous story perfectly captures his pragmatic philosophy. Money is money, and the state needed it desperately. While some of his taxes were mocked, they were incredibly effective. He reviewed tax rolls across the empire, ensuring that provinces were paying their fair share. He imposed taxes on inheritances and legal disputes. It wasn't always popular, but it was necessary. Through this careful and sometimes ruthless financial management, Vespasian did something miraculous. He balanced the budget. He pulled Rome back from the brink of financial collapse and created a surplus. This financial stability was the bedrock upon which he would build his most lasting legacy. And what did he do with that surplus? He gave the people of Rome the greatest symbol of its power and endurance ever conceived, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known to us as the Colosseum. The site chosen for this monumental structure was significant. It was built on the grounds of Nero's opulent Golden House, a sprawling private palace that had been a symbol of an excess. By draining the artificial lake and building a public amphitheater in its place, Vespasian was sending a clear message. The land was being returned to the people. This was no longer the private playground of a tyrant. It was a space for all Romans to enjoy. The construction of the Colosseum was a feat of engineering that still astounds us today. It was funded by the spoils of war, particularly from the sack of Jerusalem in 70 AD. This influx of wealth, combined with Vespasian's restored state treasury, allowed the project to move forward on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of workers, including many captured prisoners of war, toiled for years to bring the vision to life. The amphitheater was designed to hold over 50,000 spectators with a complex system of entrances, exits, and staircases that could fill and empty the venue in minutes. It featured a retractable awning, the velarium, to shade a portion of the audience from the sun, and a vast underground network of tunnels and holding pens, the hypogeum, for gladiators and wild animals. Vespasian didn't live to see the Colosseum completed. He passed away in 79 AD, and the honor of inaugurating the amphitheater fell to his son, Titus, in 80 AD. The inaugural games lasted for 100 days and were a spectacle of unimaginable scale, featuring gladiatorial combats, wild animal hunts, and even mock naval battles. But the Colosseum was more than just a venue for bloody entertainment. It was a political statement. It was a gift from the Flavian Dynasty to the Roman people, a symbol of stability, prosperity, and the restoration of order. It was proof that Rome had not only survived its darkest hour, but had emerged stronger and more magnificent than ever. Vespasian, the practical soldier, had used his financial acumen and his grand vision to build an icon that would represent Roman power for millennia. He found Rome a city of brick, and through his efforts, set it on the path to becoming a city of marble, forever embodied by the enduring arches of the Colosseum. Thank you so much for joining me for this look at Vespasian's incredible rebuilding of Rome. It's a powerful story of recovery and resilience. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more chapters in our Roman history series. We love hearing from you, so leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Today, we stand at a pivotal moment in the story of Rome, a time of rebirth and monumental ambition. We've just navigated the turbulent year of the four emperors, a period of chaos that followed the dramatic downfall of Nero. Now, with the city breathing a collective sigh of relief, a new dynasty rises, the Flavians. And with them, an idea is born, an idea that will be etched in stone and stand for millennia. This is Chapter 15, the birth of the Colosseum. Our story begins with the man who brought stability back to the empire, Emperor Vespasian. Having secured his power, he faced a city scarred not just by civil war, but by the excesses of his predecessor. Nero's reign had been one of private indulgence on a public scale, culminating in his infamous Domus Aurea, the Golden House. This was no ordinary palace. It was a sprawling private estate built right in the heart of Rome, complete with a colossal artificial lake, forests, and gilded halls. It was a symbol of an emperor who had taken the city's land for his own pleasure, alienating the Roman people. Vespasian, a pragmatic and down-to-earth soldier, knew that to legitimize his new Flavian dynasty, he needed to do more than just rule effectively. He needed a grand gesture, a powerful statement that would wash away the memory of Nero and declare a new era for Rome. He needed to show the people that the city was once again theirs. And what better way to do that than by dismantling the very heart of Nero as private paradise and replacing it with something for everyone? The site he chose was poetic in its symbolism. Right where the artificial lake of the Domus Aurea shimmered, Vespasian decreed the construction of a new permanent amphitheater. This wasn't just a practical decision. It was a masterstroke of political theater. He was literally draining Nero's private playground to build a public arena. The message was crystal clear. What one man took for himself, the new emperor was giving back to the people. The land that had been stolen for a tyrant's vanity would now be consecrated to the entertainment and unity of the Roman populace. This new structure would be known as the Flavian Amphitheater, a monument not to one man's ego, but to the Flavian family's generosity and to the spirit of Rome itself. The vision for this amphitheater was as grand as the gesture itself. Rome already had amphitheaters, but many were temporary wooden structures. The largest, the Circus Maximus, was designed for chariot races, a different kind of spectacle. Vespasian envisioned something else entirely. He wanted an arena for all of Rome, a place where the entire social spectrum, from the emperor and senators down to the humblest commoner, could gather under one roof, so to speak. It was to be a microcosm of Roman society, a place where everyone, rich and poor, could share in a common experience. This was a radical idea in its own way. While Roman society was rigidly hierarchical, the amphitheater would be a unifying force. Yes, the seating would be strictly arranged according to social class senators at the front. Women and the poor at the very top, but they would all be watching the same show, cheering the same victories, and feeling the same collective thrill. It was a vision of shared Roman identity, played out on the grandest stage imaginable. The Flavian Amphitheater was designed to be the people's palace, a gift that would endure for generations and forever associate the Flavian name with public welfare and imperial magnificence. With the vision set, the monumental task of construction began around 70 to 72 AD. Imagine the scene. First, the massive undertaking of draining the lake. Roman engineers, masters of hydraulics, would have devised a complex system of canals and drains to divert the water and dry the marshy ground. This was no small feat. It required immense manpower and incredible technical skill. Once the ground was prepared, the foundation work started. Workers dug a massive elliptical trench over 30 feet deep, which was then filled with tons of concrete and stone. This wasn't the concrete we know today, but a unique Roman formula using volcanic ash, which created a material of incredible strength and durability. This solid foundation was crucial. It had to support a structure that would eventually soar to the height of a modern 15-story building and accommodate over 50,000 spectators. The initial stages of construction would have been a hive of activity. Thousands of workers, many of whom were prisoners of war from the recent Jewish-Roman War, labored under the direction of Roman architects and engineers. The air would have been filled with the sounds of hammers chipping at stone, the shouts of foremen, and the creak of wooden cranes lifting massive blocks of travertine limestone, quarried from the nearby hills of Tivoli. These enormous blocks, some weighing several tons, were the building's primary skeleton. They were not cemented together in the traditional sense, but were precisely cut and held together by iron clamps, a testament to the Roman skill in stone masonry. As the first tier of the outer wall began to rise, the shape of the amphitheater would have slowly emerged from the ground. Picture the concentric rings of arches, a design feature that was both beautiful and incredibly practical. These arches were not just decorative. They provided structural support, distributed the immense weight of the building, and, most importantly, created dozens of ground-level entrances known as vomitoria. This ingenious system allowed the vast crowds to enter and exit the building quickly and safely, a principle of crowd control that stadium designers still use today. Inside the elliptical ring, a network of subterranean tunnels and chambers, known as the hypogeum, began to take shape. While the most complex version of this underground labyrinth would be added later, the initial construction laid the groundwork for the passages that would house gladiators, animals, and stage machinery. Even in these early days, the planners were thinking about the spectacle. They were building not just a stadium, but a massive, intricate machine for entertainment. Vespasian, however, would not live to see his grand vision fully realized. He passed away in 79 AD with the amphitheater largely completed up to the third tier. The task of finishing it fell to his son and successor, Titus. It was Titus who would preside over the grand inaugural games in 80 AD, a spectacular festival said to have lasted for 100 days. But the seeds of this architectural marvel, this enduring symbol of Roman power and popular culture, were sown by Vespasian on the ruins of Nero's Golden House. He set out to build more than just a stone arena. He set out to build unity, to restore public pride, and to give the heart of Rome back to its people. The Flavian Amphitheater, which future generations would come to call the Colosseum, was born from this powerful act of symbolic reclamation, a monument built not for a king, but for a city. And that is where we will leave it for today. The foundation has been laid, the walls are rising, and the greatest arena the world had ever seen is taking shape. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the incredible history of Rome, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to have you with us as we continue the story. Until next time, stay curious. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the Roman Empire. Today, we're stepping into the heart of Roman society in Chapter 16, Entertainment and Empire. We often think of Rome in terms of legions, senators, and aqueducts. But what about the things that filled the daily lives of its people? What kept this vast, sprawling empire, with its countless cultures and languages, feeling like one unified entity? The answer, surprisingly, lies in entertainment. Imagine the roar of the crowd, the dust kicking up from the arena floor, the collective gasp of 50,000 people watching a spectacle unfold. This wasn't just a day out. It was a fundamental part of Roman identity. Games, or ludi as they were called, were more than just diversions. They were powerful tools of social and political cohesion. In a world without mass media, these public spectacles were the biggest show in town, and everyone, from the emperor to the poorest citizen, was part of the audience. They shared the same thrills, the same suspense, the same moments of triumph and tragedy. This shared experience forged a powerful, unspoken bond, a sense of belonging to something grand and powerful, Rome itself. The games were a stage where the power and generosity of the emperor were on full display, reinforcing the social order while giving the masses a release from the hardships of daily life. Now let's talk about a man who understood this better than anyone, Emperor Vespasian. When he came to power in 69 AD, Rome was a mess. It was recovering from the chaotic year of the four emperors, a brutal civil war that had torn the empire apart. The city was scarred, and the people were weary and divided. Vespasian knew that military might alone wouldn't be enough to heal the wounds. He needed to win the hearts and minds of the Roman people, to restore their faith in the stability and majesty of the empire. His solution was monumental, both literally and figuratively. He initiated the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, the building we now know as the Colosseum. Think about the genius of this move. He was building the largest, most magnificent entertainment venue the world had ever seen, right in the heart of the capital. This wasn't just a construction project. It was a public relations masterpiece. It was a clear message: the chaos is over, peace is restored, and a new era of prosperity and grand entertainment has begun. By providing these spectacular games, Vespasian wasn't just distracting the populace. He was actively demonstrating his power, his wealth, and his commitment to the welfare of his people. He saw entertainment as an essential tool of statecraft, a way to channel public energy, reinforce social hierarchies, and create a sense of shared purpose. The Colosseum became a symbol of his dynasty and a testament to the idea that a happy, entertained populace is a stable and governable one. It was a brilliant strategy to solidify his rule and unite the empire under his banner. It's a fascinating, and for us, a difficult paradox to wrap our heads around. How could an empire that celebrated the Pax Romana, the famed Roman peace that stretched across its vast territories, also be the same empire that reveled in the brutal, violent spectacles of the arena? This is one of the most striking contrasts of Roman civilization. Outside the city walls, the legions enforced a peace that allowed trade to flourish and cultures to mingle. Merchants could travel from Britain to Egypt with a degree of safety unheard of before. Yet, back in the heart of the empire, in amphitheaters like the Colosseum, staged violence was the most popular form of entertainment. How do we reconcile this? The Romans themselves likely didn't see it as a contradiction. For them, the violence inside the arena was controlled, sanctioned, and symbolic. It was a powerful reminder of Rome's military might and its dominion over the natural world and its enemies. The gladiators, often prisoners of war or criminals, represented the chaos and barbarism that Rome had conquered. Their defeat in the arena was a ritualized reenactment of Rome's triumph. In a strange way, the contained violence of the games served to highlight and reinforce the value of the peace that existed outside. It was a dramatic, visceral demonstration that order had been carved out of chaos, and that the peace enjoyed across the empire was hard-won and worth defending. The blood in the sand was the price, symbolically paid, for the tranquility on the roads. But Roman life wasn't all about the intense drama of the arena. Beyond the gladiatorial games, the entire year was structured by a soothing, predictable rhythm of festivals and religious holidays. The Roman calendar was packed with these events, each with its own traditions, rituals, and celebrations. There were festivals to honor the gods, to mark the changing of the seasons, and to commemorate great moments in Roman history. These events punctuated the year, providing regular opportunities for community gathering, feasting, and celebration. It created a reliable cycle that people could count on, a sense of continuity and stability that was deeply comforting. Imagine walking through the streets of ancient Rome. You'd hear this constant underlying hum of urban life. The chatter of merchants in the Forum, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of carts over stone-paved streets, the voices of children playing. It was the sound of a living, breathing metropolis. This everyday urban rhythm, combined with the predictable cycle of festivals, created a powerful sense of normalcy and well-being. It was the background music to Roman life. While the spectacles in the Colosseum were the dramatic crescendos, this steady hum was the constant melody. It was this combination, the thrilling highs of the games and the reassuring rhythm of daily life and festivals, that truly held the fabric of Roman society together. It made life in the empire not just peaceful, but predictable, entertaining, and for millions, a source of immense pride. This intricate tapestry of entertainment, ritual, and daily routine was the true foundation of the empire's enduring power. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of Roman entertainment. It's a complex and fascinating topic that tells us so much about who they were. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue exploring the ancient world with us, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our series on the Flavian Dynasty. Today, we're diving deep into a side of Emperor Vespasian that often gets overshadowed by his military victories and political reforms. We're exploring Vespasian the man, the father, the husband, the mentor, and the surprisingly witty character who won the hearts of ordinary Romans. This is Chapter 17, Family and Legacy. Vespasian wasn't just building an empire. He was building a dynasty. At the heart of this ambition were his two sons, Titus and Domitian. His relationship with them was a fascinating blend of paternal affection and rigorous imperial training. He saw them not just as his children but as the future of Rome, and he was determined to prepare them for the immense responsibility that awaited. Let's start with Titus, the golden child. From a young age, Titus was groomed for greatness. He was educated alongside Britannicus, the son of Emperor Claudius, receiving the finest instruction in rhetoric, literature, and military strategy. Vespasian didn't just send him to school. He brought him into the very center of power. When Vespasian was a general, Titus was his right-hand man. During the critical Jewish-Roman War, Titus wasn't just an observer. He was a commander, leading legions and making strategic decisions. This wasn't just about teaching him warfare. It was about teaching him leadership. Vespasian trusted Titus implicitly, and this trust was repaid with loyalty and competence. Their bond was one of mutual respect and shared purpose. Vespasian was molding a successor who understood the burdens of command because he had carried them himself. Then there was Domitian, the younger son. The dynamic here was far more complex and frankly more fraught with tension. While Titus was campaigning in the east with his father, Domitian remained in Rome. He was young, ambitious, and found himself in a city seething with political intrigue during the chaotic year of the four emperors. He acted as the family's representative in the capital, a risky and high-pressure role. But Vespasian seemed to keep Domitian at a distance, perhaps wary of his son's unchecked ambition or his lack of real-world military experience compared to Titus. While Titus was celebrated as a war hero, Domitian was often relegated to ceremonial roles, given honors but little actual power. This created a simmering resentment in Domitian. Vespasian was trying to maintain discipline to ensure his younger son didn't overstep, but this strictness may have inadvertently fueled the very paranoia and desire for absolute control that would later define Domitian's own reign. It's a classic tale of a father trying to manage two very different sons, one who met his expectations perfectly and another who chafed under them. But to truly understand Vespasian, we have to look beyond the imperial court and see the human side of the man. His marriage to Flavia Domitilla the Elder was a partnership built on genuine affection, long before he ever dreamed of wearing the purple. She was a woman of humble origins, but their bond was strong. They had 3 children together, Titus, Domitian, and a daughter, also named Domitilla. Sadly, his wife and daughter passed away before he became emperor. Though he never remarried, he maintained a long-term, devoted relationship with a woman named Canis, a former slave who had been a secretary to Antonia Minor, the mother of Emperor Claudius. She was his confidant and partner for many years. His loyalty to her, even when it was politically unconventional for an emperor, speaks volumes about his character. He valued personal connection and loyalty above imperial protocol. This shows us a man who, despite the immense pressures of his office, never forgot the people who were important to him. This brings us to one of Vespasian's most endearing and enduring traits, his incredible sense of humor. In an age of tyrannical and self-important emperors, Vespasian was refreshingly down-to-earth and witty. His humor wasn't just for show. It was a core part of his personality and a brilliant political tool. He could diffuse a tense situation with a quick joke and connect with common soldiers and citizens in a way few leaders could. One of the most famous stories revolves around his controversial tax on public urinals. Yes, you heard that right. When his own son, Titus, expressed his disgust at raising money from such an unsavory source, Vespasian didn't lecture him on fiscal policy. Instead, he held a coin from the first day's collection under Titus's nose and asked if it smelled bad. When Titus admitted it didn't, Vespasian delivered the legendary punchline, "Pecunia non olet," or "money does not stink." This wasn't just a witty comeback. It was a masterclass in pragmatism. It perfectly encapsulated his no-nonsense approach to governance. If it works for Rome, it's a good idea, regardless of where the money comes from. Another tale highlights his ability to laugh at himself. He was known for being rather frugal, a stark contrast to the lavish spending of his predecessors. When a delegation came to inform him that a colossal and very expensive statue had been voted in his honor, Vespasian simply held out his open palm and said, "Here is the pedestal." It was a gentle, humorous way of saying, "Thanks, but let's be practical with our resources." This kind of self-awareness made him incredibly relatable. Romans were tired of emperors who acted like gods. They loved a leader who acted like a human being, one who understood the value of a hard-earned denarius. Even on his deathbed, his wit didn't fail him. As he felt his life slipping away, he reportedly quipped, "Vi puto dies fio," which translates to, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god." This was a brilliant satirical jab at the Roman tradition of deifying emperors after their death. With his final breath, he was still the same practical, grounded man, poking fun at the pomposity of imperial culture. It's this combination of strength, pragmatism, and humor that defines Vespasian's legacy. He wasn't just the man who saved Rome from civil war and financial ruin. He was the emperor who reminded Rome what it was like to have a leader who was one of them. He was a father trying to secure a future for his sons, a loyal partner, and a man who could find humor in even the most serious of situations. He was, in short, a profoundly human emperor. Thank you so much for joining me for this look into the family life and character of Vespasian. His story is a powerful reminder that history is made not just by armies and laws, but by people with families, flaws, and a good sense of humor. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter, where we'll explore the reign of his son, Titus. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the lives of Rome's most fascinating emperors. Today, we arrive at the final chapter in the story of a man who was as down-to-earth as he was powerful, Vespasian. After a life of military campaigns, political maneuvering, and a decade spent rebuilding a shattered empire, the old soldier was finally facing an enemy he couldn't outsmart or defeat: time itself. As Vespasian entered his late 60s, the years of hard living and relentless work began to take their toll. His health, once as robust as his common sense, started to falter. He was plagued by various ailments, a common fate for many in the ancient world, but for an emperor, it was a matter of state. Yet, Vespasian was not one to let a little thing like declining health stop him from doing his duty. He had a job to do, an empire to run, and he was determined to see it through to the very end. He continued his daily routine with the same discipline that had defined his entire life. He rose before dawn, read reports and letters, and held audiences. He meticulously oversaw the empire's finances, ensuring the stability he had worked so hard to achieve would endure. Even as his body weakened, his mind remained sharp, his wit as dry as ever, and his dedication unwavering. He spent his final summers at his beloved country estates in Campania, not to retire, but simply to manage the empire from a place with cleaner air. He knew his time was short, but he refused to waste a single moment of it. This wasn't a man who would fade away quietly in a palace. He was a general who would stay at his post until the final order was given. Imagine the scene. It's the summer of 79 AD. Vespasian is at his family estate, the place where his roots were, far from the marble grandeur of Rome. He's suffering from a severe bout of what was likely a stomach ailment, and he knows this is it. The end is near. His doctors are fussing, his attendants are worried, but Vespasian remains characteristically pragmatic. He's seen death countless times on the battlefield. He's faced down rebellions and conspiracies. He wasn't afraid of this final battle. As he lay on his deathbed, surrounded by his closest confidants and his sons, Titus and Domitian, the moment that would cement his legacy in the annals of history arrived. With his last breaths, he reportedly pushed himself up, insisting that an emperor should die on his feet. And then, with a flicker of his old sardonic humor, he uttered one of the most famous last words in history. Looking at the solemn faces around him, he quipped, "Vi, puto dies fio." Oh dear. I think I'm becoming a god. Let's just pause and appreciate the sheer brilliance of that line. In an age where emperors were officially deified after death as a matter of political procedure, Vespasian turns the whole solemn affair into a final, self-deprecating joke. It was the ultimate expression of his personality. Here was a man who came from humble beginnings, who taxed public toilets, who never forgot where he came from. And now, facing the divine status that awaited him, he treats it with a shrug and a punchline. He wasn't mocking the gods or the tradition itself, but rather the absurdity of his own elevation to divinity. It was his way of saying, look at me, the old soldier from Reate, about to become a god. Isn't that something? This moment speaks volumes about his character. Throughout his reign, Vespasian had cultivated an image of being a man of the people, in stark contrast to the Nero's opulent and tyrannical reign. He was accessible, frugal, and had a sense of humor that endeared him to the common Roman. He didn't put on airs or demand fawning reverence. His final words were the capstone on that legacy. It was a display of humility that was incredibly rare among Roman emperors, many of whom became consumed by their own power and perceived greatness. Vespasian, even in the process of dying, remained grounded. He was looking at his own mortality and the grand, official legacy being prepared for him, and he chose to meet it with a wry smile. This calm reflection on his own end is perhaps the most telling aspect of Vespasian's final years. He wasn't clinging to power in a panic. He wasn't delivering a grand, self-important speech for the history books. Instead, he faced the inevitable with the same practicality and wit that he applied to balancing the imperial budget. He had spent his life putting things in order, and his death was no different. He had secured the succession for his son, Titus, ensuring a peaceful transfer of power, the first of its kind in Rome, from father to biological son. He had restored the state's finances, rebuilt the city, and brought peace after a devastating civil war. His work was done. In his mind, his legacy wasn't going to be defined by a divine title. It was defined by the Colosseum, which was nearing completion. It was defined by the restored capital, the new roads, and the fortified frontiers. His legacy was the tangible, practical stability he had brought back to the Roman world. Becoming a god was just a posthumous formality, a piece of imperial paperwork, and he couldn't resist one last joke about it. So, as we close this chapter, we see an emperor who died not as a tyrant wrapped in purple silk, but as an old man who knew he had lived a full and consequential life. He faced his end with dignity, humor, and a profound sense of self-awareness. Vespasian's final words were not just a clever quip. They were a final powerful statement about a man who changed the course of Roman history by simply being himself, a pragmatic, hardworking, and fundamentally decent man who just happened to be emperor of the world. He left the empire in the capable hands of his son Titus, ensuring his dynasty, the Flavian Dynasty, would continue his work. His calm acceptance of mortality, punctuated by that timeless joke, serves as a powerful lesson. True greatness often lies not in how you grasp for power, but in how you let it go. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the final days of Vespasian. It's a story that's both humorous and incredibly profound. If you enjoyed this video and want to explore more stories from history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more of these tales to life. Let me know in the comments what you think of Vespasian's last words. We'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the Roman Empire. In our last chapter, we met Vespasian, the gruff, no-nonsense soldier who clawed Rome back from the brink of chaos. But what happens when a man like that builds a dynasty? Today, we're exploring the reigns of his two sons, Titus and Domitian, and the dramatic conclusion of the Flavian line. When Vespasian passed away, the big question on everyone's mind was, would his sons be up to the task? The first to step into the spotlight was his eldest, Titus. If Vespasian was the tough-as-nails founder, Titus was the charismatic heir seemingly destined for greatness. He had a solid military background, having been his father's right-hand man during the Jewish War. But as emperor, he cultivated a completely different image. He was known for his generosity and charm, earning him the nickname, the darling of mankind. One of Titus's most enduring legacies was finishing a project his father had started, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known to us as the Colosseum. Vespasian had begun this monumental project to give the land Nero had privatized back to the people of Rome. Titus saw it through to completion. In 80 AD, he inaugurated the Colosseum with a spectacular series of games that lasted for 100 days. Imagine the scene: gladiatorial contests, wild animal hunts, and even mock naval battles staged in the flooded arena. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a powerful statement. The Flavians were giving Rome a new heart, a place for the masses, built on the ruins of a tyrant's private estate. The Colosseum became a symbol of the dynasty's power and its connection to the Roman people. But Titus's reign, though popular, was tragically short and marked by disaster. Just 2 months after he became emperor in 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum in ash and pumice. It was an unprecedented catastrophe. Titus responded not as a distant ruler, but as a compassionate leader. He rushed to the region, donated his own funds to relief efforts, and appointed officials to help the survivors rebuild their lives. As if that wasn't enough, Rome was then struck by a devastating fire and a severe plague. Through it all, Titus worked tirelessly, earning the love and respect of his people for his hands-on approach and genuine concern. After just 2 short years on the throne, Titus died, possibly from a fever, leaving the empire in the hands of his younger brother, Domitian. And this is where the Flavian story takes a dark and complicated turn. If Titus was the golden child, Domitian had spent his life in his brother's shadow. He was intelligent and a capable administrator, but he lacked Titus's easy charm and craved the recognition he felt he'd been denied. Initially, he governed well. He continued the Flavian building program, stabilized the economy, and defended the frontiers. He even raised the silver content of the coinage, showing a concern for fiscal responsibility. But over time, a more sinister side of Domitian's personality began to emerge. Where his father, Vespasian, was famously down-to-earth and could joke about his own humble origins, Domitian developed a taste for absolute power and grandeur. He insisted on being addressed as Dominus et Deus, which means Lord and God. This was a shocking departure from the traditional image of the emperor as the first citizen. For the Roman Senate, which prided itself on its republican traditions, this was a massive red flag. It smacked of the tyranny they had fought to escape. This growing ambition created a deep rift between Domitian and the aristocracy. He became increasingly paranoid and suspicious, seeing conspiracies everywhere. A reign of terror began to descend upon the Senate. Treason trials became common, and many prominent senators were executed or exiled, their property confiscated by the state. He relied on a network of informers, creating a climate of fear where no one felt safe. While he might have been an efficient administrator for the provinces in Rome, he ruled through fear. This starkly contrasts with the legacy of his father. Vespasian built his power on practicality, military loyalty, and a connection with the common people. Domitian tried to build his on divine right and absolute authority, alienating the very class he needed to help him govern. The Flavian era started with a man who repaired Rome's finances and ended with a man who used those finances to fund his own grandiose image while terrorizing the elite. After 15 years of increasingly autocratic rule, the fear Domitian had sown finally turned against him. In 96 AD, a conspiracy involving court officials, and possibly even his own wife, was hatched. He was assassinated in the palace, bringing the Flavian Dynasty to an abrupt and violent end. The Senate, overjoyed at his demise, immediately ordered his statues torn down and his name erased from all public records, a practice known as damnatio memoria. They wanted to pretend he had never existed, so how do we judge the Flavian era? It's a story of mixed but monumental impact. They rescued Rome from civil war, restored its finances, and gifted it with some of its most iconic landmarks like the Colosseum. Vespasian gave the empire stability. Titus gave it a brief golden moment of hope and compassion. And Domitian, despite his tyranny, was an effective administrator who strengthened the empire's borders. The Flavians showed that power could be seized by a family from outside the traditional Roman aristocracy. But they also demonstrated the corrupting influence of that power. The journey from Vespasian's humility to Domitian's divine ambition is a timeless lesson about the dangers of unchecked authority. They left Rome stronger than they found it, but their fall paved the way for a new kind of emperor and a new chapter in Rome's history. Thank you so much for joining me for this look at the rise and fall of the Flavian Dynasty. It's a fascinating and dramatic period that truly shaped the course of the Roman Empire. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more stories from ancient history. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. See you next time. Welcome back to our final chapter, The Man Behind the Marble. We've journeyed through the dramatic rise and reign of Vespasian, an emperor who inherited a fractured Rome and left it whole again. But how do we truly measure the man? It wasn't in grand pronouncements or ostentatious displays of power. No, Vespasian's greatness was a quiet, steady force, like the slow, deliberate work of a stonemason shaping a masterpiece. He was practical, diligent, and possessed a down-to-earth wit that kept him grounded, even when he held the world in his hands. He wasn't born to the purple. He earned it through grit, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to the Roman people. His greatness wasn't about being a god among men, but about being a man for his people. Think about the sheer chaos he inherited. The year of the 4 emperors had bled the treasury dry and torn the social fabric of the empire. A lesser man would have crumbled. A more tyrannical man might have ruled through fear. Vespasian did neither. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. His fiscal reforms, though initially unpopular, were nothing short of genius. He implemented new taxes, some famously on public latrines, which gave us the phrase, "money does not stink." But this wasn't greed, it was survival. He knew that without a stable economy, Rome could not be secure. This financial discipline allowed him to replenish the treasury, pay his soldiers, and, most importantly, invest in the future of Rome itself. He wasn't just patching holes. He was laying a new, stronger foundation. His policies rippled outwards, touching every corner of the empire. He extended Roman citizenship to communities in the provinces, fostering a sense of unity and shared identity. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a strategic masterstroke that integrated vast territories more deeply into the Roman world, ensuring their loyalty and contribution to the empire's strength. He reformed the Senate, bringing in capable men from Italy and the provinces, infusing the old institution with new blood and fresh perspectives. He strengthened the frontiers not through endless, costly wars of expansion, but by consolidating borders and reinforcing defenses. He understood that a secure border meant a peaceful heartland, allowing trade, culture, and daily life to flourish without the constant shadow of fear. His reign was a decade of stabilization, of careful, deliberate restoration. He was the ultimate repairman of the Roman state, and his work endured long after he was gone. And then, there is his most iconic, most enduring legacy, a structure that has defied time itself, the Colosseum. But to see it as just a stadium for bloody games is to miss the point entirely. Where was it built? On the former site of Nero's extravagant Golden House. This was a profoundly symbolic act. Vespasian tore down the monument to a tyrant's self-indulgence and in its place erected a gift for the people. The Flavian Amphitheater, as it was originally known, was a public work on an unimaginable scale, funded by the spoils of the Jewish-Roman War, but built for the citizens of Rome. It was a declaration that the empire belonged not to the emperor, but to its people. Every time a Roman citizen walked past its towering arches, they were reminded of this shift. Power was no longer hidden behind palace walls. It was being used to create something for everyone. It was a timeless reminder of Vespasian's vision, a Rome that was strong, united, and served its populace. Even today, as millions of visitors stand in awe within its broken walls, they are standing inside Vespasian's dream. They are witnessing the physical manifestation of his promise to heal the city. The Colosseum is more than just stone and mortar. It is a story of resilience. It is a monument to the idea that even after periods of chaos and tyranny, a society can rebuild, stronger and more unified than before. It embodies the transition from the excesses of the past to a new era of public responsibility. Vespasian may not have lived to see its completion, but his son Titus dedicated it in his honor, cementing the Flavian Dynasty's legacy as the restorers of Rome. Its continued existence is a testament to the quality of Roman engineering, but its conception is a testament to the quality of Vespasian's leadership. So, as we bring our story to a close, let's reflect on the incredible journey of Titus Flavius Vespasianus. He began his life not as a patrician destined for power, but as a man from a humble family of tax collectors and soldiers. He climbed the ladder through sheer merit, serving with distinction in Britain, Africa, and Judea. He was a soldier's soldier, a pragmatist, a man who understood the mechanics of the world. When destiny called him in the chaotic aftermath of Nero's fall, he answered not with ambition for its own sake, but with a sense of duty. He became the emperor Rome desperately needed: a steady hand, a sharp mind, and a humble heart. He found Rome in ruins and left it on the path to its golden age. From a common soldier to the founder of a dynasty, his life is a powerful narrative of resilience and restoration. Vespasian's story teaches us that true legacy isn't always written in fiery speeches or glorious conquests. Sometimes it's built quietly, stone by stone, policy by policy. It's found in a balanced budget, a secure border, a revitalized city, and a monument built for the many, not the few. He became the man behind the marble, an emperor whose quiet greatness solidified into an eternal legacy, proving that the most powerful leaders are often the ones who seek not to elevate themselves, but to lift up the world around them. His was a life that truly mattered, a story of an ordinary man who did extraordinary things and became in the end an eternal emperor. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the life of Vespasian. It has been an honor to share his story with you. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. Your support means the world and helps us continue to bring these stories to light. Until next time, stay curious.